Between the Mediterranean and the desert, there was once a narrow strip of land. The people who lived there 5,000 years ago did something remarkable. They created the first alphabet, mixed metals to make bronze, sailed farther than anyone before them. They called their land Canaan. Every letter you read, every purple garment worn by kings. It all started here, in this place that most maps no longer show. 10,000 years ago, this same land looked different. No cities, no harbours, no merchants counting purple shells. Just small groups of people following animals through the hills. They were hunters. Their grandparents had been hunters. Their grandparents' grandparents too. But something was changing. The ice that had covered much of the world was melting, had been melting for thousands of years, and as it melted, this narrow strip between the sea and desert became special. Rain fell here, not too much, not too little, just enough. The hunters noticed it first. Every spring they came back to the same valleys, the same caves, and every spring they found the same thing. Wild wheat growing in thick patches. Barley too. Seeds so heavy they bent the stalks. In other places, finding enough wild grain to feed a family took days of searching. Here, you could gather a month's worth in a morning. So they started staying longer. Why leave when food was so easy to find? We call these people the Natufians. That's a modern name, of course. We don't know what they called themselves. But we know where they lived because they left something behind. Stone houses. Circular ones, half buried in the ground. Think about that for a moment. These were people who had always moved, always followed the herds. But here, in this place that would become Canaan, they built the first houses. Real houses. Made to last. Inside these houses, archaeologists found something fascinating. Grinding stones. Dozens of them. Worn smooth from crushing grain. But not just any grain. Wild grain. They hadn't figured out farming yet. They were still gathering. But they were gathering so much that they needed tools. Storage pits. A reason to stay put. One Natufian site, near what we now call Jericho, tells an interesting story. Around 9000 BCE, the people there were still hunters, still gatherers, but they had over 100 grinding stones, more than any group of wanderers would carry. Then something happened. We're not exactly sure what. Maybe someone noticed that dropped seeds grew into new plants. Maybe it was an accident. Grain spilled near the camp, forgotten, until months later when green shoots appeared. However it happened, by 8500 BCE, those same people were doing something revolutionary. They were planting, on purpose. The first fields were tiny, probably looked more like gardens, but they worked. Plant seeds, wait, harvest. Plant seeds, wait, harvest. Each generation got a little better at it, selected the biggest grains, the ones that didn't fall off the stalk too early. This is where our story really begins. Because once people started farming, everything changed. Not overnight. Change came slowly in those days. But it came. By 8000 BCE, Jericho had grown from a campsite to something else. The people there built a tower, not a small one, 28 feet high, 28 feet across at the base. Solid stone. Why build a tower? We don't know. Maybe for defense, maybe for ceremonies, maybe just to say, we are here and we're staying. But think about what it took to build. Planning. Leadership. Enough extra food that some people could spend months moving stones instead of hunting. The tower tells us something important. These weren't scattered families anymore. This was a community. Hundreds of people, maybe more, all living together, all depending on those fields of wheat and barley. And it wasn't just Jericho. All across this land, the same thing was happening. Little settlements growing into villages, hunters becoming farmers, though they still hunted too. The bones tell us that. Gazelle bones, wild boar, But mixed in with them, something new. Sheep bones, goat bones. But these weren't wild animals. See, the people here had figured out something else. You didn't have to chase animals. You could keep them, feed them, breed them. It took time, generations. Wild sheep are nothing like farm sheep. They're mean, fast, hard to catch. But if you catch the calm ones, feed the friendly ones, let only those ones have babies. After enough generations, you don't have wild sheep anymore. You have something new, something that had never existed before. Domestic animals. The climate helped. This part of the world, right here between the Mediterranean and the desert, had perfect conditions. Enough rain for crops. Not so much that seeds rotted. Hot summers to ripen grain. Cool winters that didn't kill everything. In Egypt, you needed the Nile's floods. In Mesopotamia, you needed complex irrigation. But here you just needed to plant and wait. The rain came when it should. The sun shone when it should. That's not to say it was easy. It wasn't. Crop failures happened. Droughts came. Animals died. But compared to anywhere else, this narrow strip of land made the transition from hunting to farming possible, almost natural. By 7000 BCE, the experiment was complete. The wanderers had become settlers. The hunters had become farmers. They didn't know it yet, but they had laid the foundation for something bigger, much bigger. These early farmers, living in round stone houses, tending small fields, keeping small herds, they weren't Canaanites. That name, that identity, was still thousands of years away. But they were learning the lessons their descendants would perfect: how to read the weather, when to plant, when to harvest, which valleys had the best soil, where the springs never dried up, how to store grain so it lasted through winter, how to work together, because farming, real farming, needs cooperation, shared labor, shared knowledge, shared risk. The archaeological evidence from this period is fascinating, not because of gold or monuments, there was none of that yet, but because of the small things. Seeds getting bigger over time, animal bones showing selective breeding, tools becoming specialized, sickles just for harvesting, different stones for grinding different grains, and something else. The first evidence of trade, not much. Just obsidian blades from far away, seashells found inland, but it was starting. The connections that would one day make Canaan the crossroads of the ancient world. The population was growing too, slowly at first. A farming village might have 50 people, maybe 100, but that was huge compared to hunting bands of 20 or 30. And farmers had more children, needed more children, extra hands for the fields. More people meant new problems. Who owned which field? What happened when someone died? Who decided when to plant? The first leaders were probably just the best farmers, the ones whose advice worked, but even that was new. Hunters had leaders for the hunt, but farmers needed leaders all the time. We can see it in how villages were laid out. Early Natufian camps were just scattered houses, but by 7000 BCE, villages had plans. Houses in rows, storage areas in the center, shared spaces for grinding grain. Someone was making decisions, creating order. They were also creating traditions. We find the same style of houses across the region, the same burial practices, the same tools, not identical. Each village had its own ways, but similar enough that we know they were talking to each other, learning from each other. This is important, because 5,000 years later, when we finally get to call these people Canaanites, this pattern continues. Independent cities, different but connected, sharing ideas while keeping their own identity. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. In 7000 BCE, There were no cities, no kings, no purple dye, no alphabets, just farmers, living in villages, growing grain, raising animals, having children, building a future they couldn't imagine. They had discovered that this land, this narrow strip between sea and desert, could support them, feed them, let them stay in one place, put down roots, real roots. The hunting days were ending. The age of settlements had begun. And in those small fields, those round stone houses, those first permanent villages, the foundation was laid. Everything that would come next, the cities, the trade, the inventions that would change the world, it all started here. With farmers, planting seeds, waiting for rain, watching the first sunrise of a new age, the villages would grow. Stone houses would become mud brick. Mud brick would become cities. But first, something else had to happen. The farmers had to become something more than farmers. They had to become builders of walls, of societies, of the world's first urban experiment. The change didn't happen overnight. Villages don't just wake up one day and decide to become cities. But somewhere around 3500 BCE, that's exactly what started happening across this land. The villages had been growing, slowly. A few more houses each generation, a few more fields. But now something was different. The growth was speeding up. And with it came problems nobody had faced before. Think about a village of 200 people. Everyone knows everyone. You know who's good at making pots, who tells the best stories, who's lazy, who's trustworthy. But what happens when it's 2,000 people? 5,000? You can't know everyone anymore. You need rules, systems, ways to keep track of things. The first sign of this change shows up in the garbage, literally. Archaeologists love ancient garbage pits. They tell us what people threw away. And around 3,500 BCE, the garbage changes. Before, every house had the same stuff. Grinding stones, cooking pots, broken tools. Everyone did a little of everything. But now we find houses with dozens of half-finished pots. Nothing but pots. Another house has piles of flint chips from making blades. Just blades. People were specializing. It makes sense when you think about it. If you spend all day making pots, you get good at it. Really good. Your pots don't leak. They're prettier. They last longer. But if you're making pots all day, who's growing your food? That's where the system comes in. The potter makes pots. The farmer grows extra grain. They trade. Simple. Except it's not simple at all. Because now you need ways to measure, ways to count, ways to make sure the trade is fair. The earliest cities solved this with tokens, little clay shapes. A cone meant a small measure of grain. A sphere meant a large measure. A disc meant a jar of oil. Drop the right tokens in a clay ball, seal it up, and you've got a receipt, a contract, proof of what was traded. But specialization meant more than just potters and farmers. By 3000 BCE, the list was growing. Metalworkers who knew the secret of bronze, builders who could make walls that didn't fall down, priests who knew exactly when to plant for the best harvest, merchants who travelled between settlements, guards who watched the gates. Yes, gates, because the other big change was walls. A village doesn't need walls. Maybe a fence to keep animals in. But when you have 5,000 people, warehouses full of grain, workshops full of valuable goods, you need protection. Real protection. The walls of early cities were impressive, not just piles of stones. These were engineered structures, foundations dug deep, corners reinforced, gates designed to force attackers into kill zones. Someone knew what they were doing, and that someone wasn't a farmer with spare time. We can trace the growth of cities in these walls. Tel Arad started as an unwalled settlement around 3500 BCE. By 3000 BCE, it had walls 10 feet thick. By 2700 BCE, Those walls enclosed 35 acres, big enough for 5,000 people, maybe more. But walls did more than protect. They created identity. Inside the walls was us. Outside was them. Your city. Other cities. The beginning of politics. And with politics came leaders. Real leaders. Not just the best farmer giving advice. These were people whose full-time job was making decisions, organizing work crews, settling disputes, dealing with other cities. We see their houses, bigger than others, in the center of town, near the temples, because religion and power were already mixing. The leaders claimed to speak for the gods, or to be chosen by them. It's easier to get people to work together when they think the gods want it. The temples tell their own story. Early villages had small shrines, a special room, maybe a standing stone. But cities? Cities built temples that dominated the skyline. Massive stone foundations, multiple rooms, courtyards for gatherings, storerooms for offerings. These weren't just religious centers. They were economic engines. Temples owned land, collected taxes, employed craftsmen, ran schools for scribes. The priests weren't just performing rituals, they were managing wealth, recording transactions, making loans. Yes, loans. We have the tablets to prove it. Temple gives farmer seeds for planting. Farmer pays back with interest after harvest. Can't pay? Temple takes the land. It was capitalism before anyone invented the word. The social structure was crystallizing. At the top, kings and priests, sometimes the same person. Below them, the specialists, metal workers, scribes, merchants, soldiers. Below them, farmers and laborers. At the bottom, slaves. Usually war captives or people who couldn't pay debts. It wasn't fair, but it worked. It let thousands of people live together, coordinate massive projects, build things no village could build, like water systems. Hazor, which would become one of Canaan's greatest cities, started building cisterns around 3000 BCE, not just holes in the ground, engineered reservoirs, lined with plaster to prevent leaks, connected by channels, with settling basins to remove silt. Someone designed that system. Someone organized the work crews. Someone maintained it. Cities needed infrastructure, and infrastructure needed organization. The archaeology shows something else interesting. Different cities developed different specialties. Megiddo controlled trade routes. Jericho had the best springs. Beit Yera made a distinctive pottery that shows up everywhere. They weren't just cities, they were brands. Trade between cities exploded. We find pottery from one city in the ruins of another. Obsidian from Anatolia, shells from the Red Sea, even lapis lazuli from Afghanistan. These cities weren't isolated. They were connected, part of a network that stretched across the known world. But they were also independent, fiercely so. Each city had its own king, its own god. Well, the same gods, but each city claimed special relationships. Hazor belonged to Hadad, Sidon to Astarte, Jerusalem to Shalem. The god protected the city, and the city honored the god. This independence mattered. In Egypt, one pharaoh ruled everything. In Mesopotamia, empires rose and fell. But here in Canaan, cities stayed independent, allied sometimes, fought sometimes, but never united under one ruler. Not for long, anyway. Maybe it was geography. The land was too broken up, too many valleys, too many hills, no great river to unite around. Or maybe it was culture. These people valued their independence, their local traditions, their way of doing things. Whatever the reason, this pattern, independent cities sharing a culture, would define Canaan for the next 3,000 years. Even when empires conquered them, even when they spread across the Mediterranean, They remained stubbornly independent, proudly local. The cities were also laboratories, each one trying new things, new ways to make pottery, new metalworking techniques, new architectural styles. What worked spread quickly, what didn't disappeared. Evolution through trade and competition. By 2700 BCE, you could stand on Megiddo's walls and see a transformed landscape. Where once there were scattered villages, now there were cities, real cities, with walls and temples and palaces, with thousands of people living together, working together, creating together. The buildings themselves tell the story. Early villages had only houses, all roughly the same size. But cities? Cities had architecture, public buildings, monumental structures, different quarters for different activities, industrial areas near the edges, elite houses near the center, markets in open squares. City planning had been invented, streets laid out in grids, drainage systems to handle rain, designated areas for different activities, potters' quarters where the smoke wouldn't bother everyone, metalworking areas near the walls for fire safety, and everywhere the buzz of activity. Cities never slept, not completely. Guards walked the walls, bakers started before dawn, merchants haggled in the markets, priests performed daily rituals, scribes recorded it all. Well, they tried to record it. Writing was still primitive, mostly numbers and short labels. Real writing, the kind that could capture stories and laws and letters, was still centuries away. But the need was there. Cities were too complex to run on memory alone. We see it in the seal impressions. Every official had a seal, a unique design carved in stone. Press it in wet clay, and you've marked something as yours, approved it, authorized it. Sealed jars show up everywhere, on storage jars, on door locks, on tablets recording transactions. The cities were becoming bureaucratic. Forms to fill out, procedures to follow, chains of command. All the things that make modern people groan, but that actually let large groups function. And they were large groups. By 2500 BCE, the biggest Canaanite cities held 10,000 people, maybe more. That's bigger than most towns in medieval Europe, bigger than anything in the Americas until much later. These were real urban centers, but success brought challenges. All those people needed food. The old system of each family farming couldn't support urban populations. Farming had to intensify, get more efficient, which meant investment. Terraces to farm hillsides, irrigation to water more land, better tools, better techniques. Cities drove agricultural innovation. They had to. Starving cities revolt. And the rulers knew it. So they invested, built infrastructure, organized labor, created the surpluses that let cities exist. It was a feedback loop. Bigger cities needed more food. More food production needed better organization. Better organization let cities grow bigger, round and round, each generation building on the last. By 2500 BCE, the transformation was complete. The land between the Mediterranean and the desert wasn't a place of villages anymore. It was a land of cities, proud, independent cities, each ruled by kings, each protected by walls, each connected by trade. The age of cities had begun, and with it came new possibilities, new inventions, new ideas. The villages had figured out how to farm. The cities would figure out how to change the world, starting with a discovery that would transform warfare, trade, and daily life. The discovery of bronze. The discovery probably happened by accident. A copper smith working near his fire, some tin ore mixed in with the copper by mistake. When he pulled the metal from the fire, it was different, harder, sharper, better. We don't know exactly where it happened first. Maybe in the mountains of Anatolia, maybe right here in Canaan. But by 3000 BCE, smiths across the region knew the secret. 9 parts copper, 1 part tin. Heat them together and you got bronze. It doesn't sound like much, a slightly better metal. But bronze changed everything. Copper is soft, bends easily, loses its edge fast. Bronze holds an edge, stays sharp, lasts longer, and it's harder, much harder. A bronze sword could cut through copper armor like cloth. A bronze plough could break ground that laughed at copper tools. Bronze axes could fell trees in half the time. For people who had bronze, life got easier. For people who didn't, life got much harder. But here's the thing about bronze. Copper was everywhere. Well, not everywhere, but common enough. You could find it in the hills around Timnah, in the mountains of Cyprus, local sources for local needs. Tin was different. Tin was rare. The nearest good tin sources were in Anatolia, far to the north, or maybe in Afghanistan. Even farther. To make bronze, Canaanite cities needed tin, and to get tin, they needed to trade. Long-distance trade, dangerous trade, expensive trade. This changed the game completely. Before bronze, cities could be self-sufficient. Grow your own food, make your own tools, build your own walls. But now you needed connections, trade partners, allies. A city without bronze was a weak city, an isolated city, a doomed city. So the trade routes expanded. Caravans heading north to Anatolia, ships sailing to Cyprus, maybe even expeditions to mysterious lands beyond. All for tin, the metal that made bronze possible. The smiths who knew how to make bronze became powerful, really powerful. They didn't share their secrets easily. Each workshop had its own recipe, its own techniques, passed from master to apprentice, father to son, guarded like treasure. Because it was treasure, a good bronze smith could name his price. Cities competed for their services. Rulers showered them with gifts. Temples employed them full-time. The hammer and anvil became symbols of power. We can see it in their workshops, not hidden in back alleys, right in the city centres, near the palaces, protected by walls. These weren't just craftsmen, they were strategic assets. The furnaces tell the story. Early copper smelting used simple pit furnaces, hot, but not hot enough for efficient work. Bronze needed better, higher temperatures, more control, so they innovated. By 2800 BCE, Canaanite smiths were using bellows, leather bags that pumped air into the fire, hotter flames, better metal. They figured out how to recycle bronze, melt down broken tools and make new ones. Nothing wasted. They developed different alloys for different purposes. More tin for harder bronze, good for weapons and tools. Less tin for softer bronze, better for decorative items. They even added arsenic sometimes, made the bronze easier to cast, though it probably killed a few smiths before they figured out the dangers. The tools they made transformed daily life. Bronze sickles that made harvesting 3 times faster. Bronze axes that could actually fell the famous cedars of Lebanon. Bronze needles fine enough for delicate sewing. Bronze fish hooks that didn't bend when you caught something big. For farmers, bronze meant everything. A bronze plough could break ground that stone tools couldn't touch. Hillsides that were useless before became productive fields. More land under cultivation, more food, more people. Bronze chisels let builders work with harder stone, create finer details, build stronger walls. The great temples of this period, with their precise stonework. Impossible without bronze tools. But it was warfare where bronze really shone, or gleamed, rather. A bronze sword was a thing of beauty and terror. Leaf-shaped blades that could thrust or slash. Balanced perfectly. Light enough to use all day. strong enough to punch through armor, bronze spear points that didn't chip like flint, bronze arrowheads that flew true, bronze armor that could turn a blade. For the first time, professional soldiers made sense. A farmer with a stone axe was just a farmer. A soldier with bronze weapons and armor was a walking tank. Cities started maintaining standing armies. Small ones at first, the palace guard, elite units. But they made all the difference. Bronze weapons in trained hands could defeat much larger forces armed with older tools. This created an arms race. Every city needed bronze weapons, needed them desperately, which meant every city needed tin, which meant trade became a matter of survival. The trade networks that developed were incredible. We can trace them through the bronze itself. Each source of copper has unique impurities, like a fingerprint. Test the bronze, and you can tell where the copper came from. Canaanite bronze shows up everywhere, in Egyptian tombs, in Mesopotamian palaces, in Anatolian temples, and objects from all those places show up in Canaan. The bronze trade created the first real international economy. Merchants became almost as important as kings, maybe more important. A king could rule a city, but a merchant who controlled tin supplies, he could make or break kingdoms. The port cities especially thrived. Byblos, Sidon, Tyre, ships loaded with copper from Cyprus, tin from who knows where, coming together in Canaanite workshops, transformed into tools and weapons, shipped back out across the known world. But bronze did more than create trade. It created inequality, real, lasting inequality. In the old days, everyone had basically the same stuff. Stone tools, clay pots, maybe some copper items. But bronze was expensive, really expensive. Only the rich could afford bronze tools. Only the very rich could afford bronze weapons. A farmer with bronze tools could work more land, grow more food, get richer, buy more bronze tools. Meanwhile, his neighbour with stone tools fell further behind, couldn't compete, ended up working for the rich farmer, or borrowing from him, or selling his land. We see it in the archaeology. Houses getting bigger, much bigger, elite quarters developing in cities, regular neighbourhoods for regular people, and slums for the poor. The Bronze Age created the wealth gap. It also created specialised knowledge. Working bronze wasn't like knapping flint. Any farmer could make a basic stone tool. But bronze needed training. Years of it. Temperature control, timing, the right mix of metals, when to add flux, when to quench, when to hammer. A mistake meant ruined metal, wasted resources. In a world where tin was worth its weight in silver, mistakes weren't tolerated. So Smith trained apprentices carefully, created guilds, professional organizations, the beginning of specialized education. They also innovated constantly. Lost wax casting for complex shapes, hollow casting to save metal, alloy experiments for different properties. Every generation of smiths built on the last, accumulated knowledge, pushed boundaries. By 2500 BCE, they were creating things that amazed even them. Swords so well balanced they felt alive in your hand. Decorative pieces so fine they looked impossible. Tools so precise they enabled new crafts entirely. Like fine woodworking, bronze tools could carve details impossible with stone. Furniture became art. Boxes with perfect joints. Chairs that were actually comfortable. The cedars of Lebanon worked with bronze tools, furnished palaces across the ancient world. Or jewellery. Bronze wasn't as pretty as gold, but it could be worked into shapes gold couldn't hold. Delicate pins, complex clasps, tiny bells that actually rang. Combined with gold and silver, bronze findings created jewellery that was both beautiful and functional. The temples benefited too. Bronze tools could carve stone precisely, create statues with realistic features, build altars with complex designs. The gods had never been honoured so elaborately, and the gods apparently were pleased, or so the priests said. The Bronze Age brought prosperity. Cities grew, trade flourished, population exploded. It must be divine favour, right? The rulers certainly thought so. They commissioned bronze statues of themselves, had their deeds recorded on bronze tablets, built their power on bronze weapons. The metal became synonymous with authority, but bronze created problems too, environmental ones. Smelting bronze needed fuel, lots of it, charcoal from burned wood. The forests started disappearing. First the ones near cities, then the ones further out. Erosion followed deforestation. Good soil washed away. Rivers silted up. Some areas that were fertile in 3000 BCE were barren by 2000 BCE, the price of progress. There were social problems too. The tin trade created dependencies, vulnerabilities. When trade routes got disrupted, cities suffered. No tin meant no bronze. No bronze meant no competitive edge. Cities rose and fell based on their access to trade, and the inequality kept growing. Bronze weapons made raiding profitable. Why farm when you could take what others grew? Warfare became endemic, not total war, not yet, but constant skirmishing, raids, counter-raids, lives lost over metal. The smiths themselves became targets. Captured smiths were prizes of war, forced to work for new masters, their secrets extracted, their skills exploited. The profession that started as craft became something darker. But despite the problems, or maybe because of them, innovation continued. Better furnaces, better alloys, better techniques. By 2200 BCE, Canaanite bronze was the best in the world. Their weapons sought after, their tools imitated, their smiths recruited by foreign kings. The bronze trade also created something unexpected. International law, of sorts. Treaties between cities, trade agreements, dispute resolution mechanisms, all carved in stone or pressed in clay. The beginning of diplomacy, because everyone needed the trade to continue. A war that disrupted tin supplies hurt everyone. So cities learned to negotiate, to compromise, to maintain the networks that kept bronze flowing. The Bronze Age lasted over 2,000 years. Generations lived and died knowing only bronze as the pinnacle of technology. It seemed permanent, eternal, the way things would always be. But nothing lasts forever. Already in the mountains of Anatolia, smiths were experimenting with a different metal. Harder than bronze, more common than tin. Iron was coming, and with it another revolution. But that was still future. In 2200 BCE, bronze was king, and the Canaanites who mastered its secrets, they were building something even more revolutionary than metal tools. They were building a new way to capture language itself, marks that meant sounds, sounds that meant words, words that could travel without voices. The bronzesmiths weren't the only ones with secrets to keep. By 2500 BCE, another group of specialists was emerging in Canaanite cities. People who could do something that seemed like magic. They could make marks that spoke. We call them scribes, but that's too simple a word for what they were. They were the memory of the city, the voice of the king, the record of the gods. Without them, cities couldn't function. Not the big ones. Not anymore. It started with counting. Always does. A merchant sending 20 jars of oil to another city. How do you make sure 20 jars arrive? You can send a guard, but guards can be bribed. You can trust the carrier, but memory fails. So you make marks. 20 marks for 20 jars. Simple. Except it's not simple when you're dealing with different goods, different amounts, different destinations. You need more marks, many more. The earliest writing in Canaan borrowed from everywhere. Egyptian hieroglyphs from the south, Mesopotamian cuneiform from the east. But using them was like wearing clothes made for someone else. They never quite fit. Egyptian hieroglyphs were beautiful, but complicated. Hundreds of symbols, each meaning a word or idea. Learning them took years, decades. Only professional scribes could master them, and even then, writing anything took forever. Cuneiform was different but not better. Wedge-shaped marks pressed in clay. Thousands of combinations. Good for Sumerian. Good for Akkadian. But Canaanite languages were different. Had different sounds, different structures. The scribes struggled. They could write king using Egyptian symbols or Mesopotamian ones. But what about Canaanite names? Local places? The specific words for local goods. They had to improvise, adapt, create new combinations. We see their experiments in the archaeological record. Tablets with mixed scripts. Egyptian symbols next to cuneiform. Local innovations squeezed between. It was messy, inconsistent, but it was a start. Then someone had an idea, we don't know who. A scribe in Byblos, maybe, or a mining foreman in Sinai. Someone who was tired of memorizing thousands of symbols. Someone who thought there must be a better way. What if instead of symbols meaning words, they meant sounds? Think about how revolutionary this was. The Egyptian symbol for water was wavy lines. It meant water, the whole word. But in the new system, wavy lines might just mean the m sound that started the word for water in Canaanite. Mem. Take the symbol for house. In Egyptian, it meant house. But in the new system, it just meant the B sound. Bet. The sound at the beginning of the Canaanite word for house. 22 sounds covered most of what you needed to say in Canaanite. 22 symbols instead of thousands. A merchant could learn them in weeks instead of years. A smart child could master them. This wasn't just a new way to write. It was a new way to think about language, breaking words into sounds, sounds into symbols. It was analysis, science, applied to human speech. The earliest alphabetic inscriptions we found come from Serebit el-Qadim in Sinai, around 1850 BCE, scratched on rock by miners, not professional scribes, miners, regular people who needed to write something and figured out how, beloved of Baalat. That's what one inscription says, simple, direct, a prayer or dedication to the goddess. But think about what it means. A miner, not a priest, not a scribe, a working man who could write his own prayer. The alphabet democratized writing. That's a modern word, but it fits. Before, writing belonged to the elite, priests and scribes who spent their lives learning. After, anyone could learn. Merchants, craftsmen, maybe even farmers. But the old scribes didn't give up easily. Why would they? Their monopoly on writing made them powerful, essential, well paid. The alphabet threatened all of that. So for centuries both systems existed side by side. Official inscriptions in Egyptian hieroglyphs, international correspondence in cuneiform, but daily business, personal notes, local records, more and more these use the alphabet. We can trace its spread through small finds, pottery shards with owners' names, seal impressions with alphabetic signs, bronze blades with makers' marks. The alphabet was spreading from the bottom up. By 1500 BCE, the alphabet had evolved, become more standardized, the symbols simpler, more abstract, less like pictures, more like letters. The scribes in different cities developed their own versions, but the principle remained the same, symbols for sounds. The clay tablets from Ugarit show us the alphabet in transition. Royal scribes there knew cuneiform, had to for diplomatic correspondence, but they also developed their own alphabetic script, 30 letters instead of 22, adapted for their specific dialect. Why 30? Because Ugaritic had sounds other Canaanite dialects didn't. They needed extra letters. This shows something important. The alphabet wasn't rigid. It could adapt, change, fit different languages. The Ugaritic tablets are treasures, not gold and silver treasures, knowledge treasures. They contain myths, legends, contracts, letters, all written in alphabetic script. By 1400 BCE, you could write anything in the alphabet, not just lists and labels, literature, the Baal cycle, the story of the storm god's battle against chaos, written in alphabetic Ugaritic, preserved on clay tablets. Without the alphabet, these stories might have been lost. Too long and complex for oral tradition alone, too specific to local culture for foreign scripts, but the alphabet captured them, preserved them. When Ugarit burned in 1200 BCE, the stories survived in the ashes. The fire that destroyed the city baked the clay tablets, made them permanent. The alphabet had given the stories immortality. Personal letters from this period are even more revealing. A merchant writing to his wife, a student writing to his teacher, a king writing to an ally, not through professional scribes, in their own hands, their own words. I am well, the children are well, business is good, send more purple cloth. Simple messages, but revolutionary. For the first time in history, ordinary people could communicate across distance, send their exact words, not filtered through scribes, not simplified for foreign scripts. The alphabet was changing how people thought. Before, knowledge was something you heard, stories told by elders, laws proclaimed by heralds. Writing was for inventory, for monuments, not for ideas. But the alphabet made ideas portable. A merchant could write down a new technique, send it to a partner. A priest could record a prayer, share it with other temples. Knowledge could travel without people. This had consequences. Big ones. Cities that adopted the alphabet early gained advantages. Their merchants made better deals. Their administrators kept better records. Their priests preserved more knowledge. We see it in the archaeological record. Cities with strong alphabetic traditions prospered. Their trade networks expanded. Their cultural influence spread. The alphabet was becoming a competitive advantage. But perhaps the biggest change was in religion. Before the alphabet, religious knowledge was strictly controlled. Priests memorized sacred stories, performed secret rituals. The gods spoke through them alone. The alphabet threatened this monopoly too. If anyone could read, anyone could access sacred texts. If anyone could write, anyone could record religious experiences. The gods were becoming more democratic too. Not that it happened overnight. The priests fought back, kept the most sacred texts in traditional scripts, developed coded language, professional jargon. But the dam had broken. Religious knowledge was spreading. By 1200 BCE, alphabetic texts appear in household shrines. Simple prayers, personal dedications, the names of gods written by common hands. People were developing personal relationships with divinity. No priest required. This would have profound consequences later. When monotheism emerged, when personal faith became central, the roots were here, in the alphabet, in the ability of individuals to read and write their own beliefs. The alphabet also changed law. Before, laws were proclaimed, memorized, interpreted by those who claimed to remember them. Justice depended on memory, on authority, on tradition. Written laws were different, fixed, checkable, arguable. The alphabet made law something you could examine, question, appeal to. It was the beginning of legal systems based on texts, not just tradition. Trade contracts became more sophisticated, marriage agreements more detailed, property transfers more secure, all because the alphabet made complex documents possible, accessible, enforceable. The spread wasn't always smooth. Different cities developed different versions. The letter shapes varied. The direction of writing wasn't fixed. Some wrote left to right, some right to left. Some alternated lines like ploughing a field. But the principle spread everywhere, from Canaan to the world. The Greeks would borrow it, add vowels. The Romans would adapt it, spread it across Europe. The Arabs would reimagine it, carry it to Asia and Africa. Every alphabetic system in the world descends from this Canaanite innovation. Latin, Greek, Arabic, Hebrew, Cyrillic. All children of those first experiments in Sinai and Byblos. All cousins of those mining inscriptions. But in 1200 BCE, that was all future. What mattered then was the present. The alphabet was transforming Canaanite society, creating new possibilities, new problems, new ways of being human. Because that's what writing is, really. a way of being human that extends beyond the body, beyond the moment. The alphabet gave humans a kind of immortality, words that outlive voices, ideas that survive their thinkers. The scribes who first drew those sound symbols couldn't have imagined their simple innovation, their practical solution to a communication problem. It would outlive bronze, outlive cities, outlive empires. Every time you read these words, you're using their invention, hearing their echo across 3,000 years. The alphabet made that possible, made us possible, connected us to them. But the Canaanites weren't done innovating. They had given the world bronze and the alphabet. Now they would give it something else, something extracted from an unlikely source, something that would make them legendary, the colour of kings itself. The smell hit you first. Miles before you reached Tyre or Sidon, the wind carried it. Rotting shellfish, thousands upon thousands of them, mountains of them. The smell of wealth. It started, like many discoveries, with someone desperate enough to try anything. Maybe a hungry beachcomber, maybe a curious child, someone who cracked open a spiny sea snail and noticed something strange. A tiny gland near the head, yellowish, unremarkable, until it touched the air. Then magic happened. The yellow turned green, the green turned blue, the blue turned purple, deep, rich purple. The colour of twilight, the colour of mystery, the colour that would make Canaan famous across the ancient world. The snail was called murex. Actually, several types of murex. Murex brandaris, Murex trunculus, Hexaplex trunculus. Different species gave slightly different colours. The Canaanites learned to use them all, but knowing about the dye and making it were very different things. Each snail produced just a few drops of the precious liquid. A single gram of pure dye needed thousands of snails. A robe? Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions. Think about what that meant. Every purple garment represented months of work. Divers collecting snails from the seafloor, workers cracking shells, specialists extracting the glands, and that was just the beginning. The glands had to be processed immediately. Left too long, they spoiled, produced brown instead of purple, or nothing at all. Timing was everything. So was technique. The dye makers of Tyre and Sidon guarded their methods like state secrets, which they were. We still don't know exactly how they did it. Archaeological evidence gives clues. Ancient texts drop hints. But the full process died with the last purple makers. We know they used salt, lots of it. The glands were packed in sea salt left to ferment. The smell got worse, much worse. But something in that rotting process was essential. It changed the chemical structure, made the colour permanent. Then came the heating. Gentle heat. Too hot and the dye was ruined. Too cool and it wouldn't develop. The mixture had to be stirred, constantly, for days. The workers' eyes watered, their lungs burned, but they kept stirring. Testing came next. A drop on wool. Wait. Watch the colour develop, not right? Adjust the mixture. Add ingredients. Secret ingredients. Each workshop had its own recipe. Honey, some texts suggest. Urine, others claim. Whatever worked. When the dye was finally ready, the real magic began. Cloth went in yellowish, came out purple, but not just any purple. Purple that didn't fade, purple that got richer with age, purple that sunshine made more beautiful, not less. This was unheard of. Other dyes faded, ran when wet, turned ugly in sunlight. But Tyrian purple lasted forever. A purple robe could be worn for generations, passed from father to son, getting more valuable with age. The economics were staggering. By 1500 BCE, purple cloth was worth more than gold by weight. Much more. A small purple cloak could buy a house. A fully purple robe, that could buy an estate. Several estates. Only the very rich could afford true purple. Kings, high priests, the wealthiest merchants. Everyone else made do with partial purple. A purple stripe on a white robe. A purple border on a cloak. Even that was expensive, but it showed status, connections, ambition. The purple trade transformed the Canaanite coast. Tyre and Sidon had been modest ports, good harbours, some trade, nothing special. Purple changed everything. Money poured in, from Egypt, from Mesopotamia, from places so distant they were almost mythical. Everyone wanted purple, and only the Canaanites could make it. Really make it. The true, deep, lasting purple. Others tried. The Greeks experimented with local shellfish, produced something purplish, but pale, weak. It wasn't the same. The Egyptians tried plant dyes, created purplish colours, but they faded, ran, disappointed. The Canaanite cities kept their monopoly through quality, and secrecy, and geography. The best murex lived in specific waters, fed on specific things. Attempts to transplant them failed, the snails died, or produced inferior dye. So the world came to Canaan. Ships lined up in Tyre's harbour, merchants from everywhere, speaking every language, all wanting one thing, purple. The purple workshops expanded, became industrial, whole neighbourhoods devoted to dye-making. The shell heaps grew into hills, then mountains, millions of shells, billions. The archaeological remains are staggering. But the workshops were more than factories. They were innovation centres. The dyers experimented constantly, mixed different species of murex, developed new extraction techniques, created different shades. Because purple wasn't just one colour, the Canaanites could produce dozens of shades. Reddish purple from one species, bluish purple from another. Mix them right, you got the famous Tyrian purple. So dark it looked black in some lights, so rich it seemed to glow. They also learned to dye different materials. Wool took purple best, but silk worked too. Linen was harder, required different methods, different mordants to fix the dye. Each material created new challenges, new opportunities. The social impact was profound. Purple created new class of wealthy merchants, not nobility, not priests, business people who got rich through trade, through connections, through understanding markets. These merchants built mansions, funded temples, married into royal families. Purple money changed the social order. Birth mattered less. Wealth mattered more. If you controlled purple, you had power. The cities adapted. Tyre built a second harbour, just for the purple trade. Sidon expanded its walls, enclosed the workshop districts. Both cities built navies, serious navies, to protect their purple ships, because piracy was a real threat. A ship carrying purple cloth was a floating treasury, worth attacking, worth dying for. The Canaanite cities learned to defend their trade, developed convoy systems, armed escorts, maritime insurance. Yes, insurance. The purple trade was too valuable to risk everything on one ship. Merchants spread risk, multiple ships, multiple routes, contracts that shared losses, the beginning of financial instruments we still use today. The purple trade also drove exploration. Merchants searched for new murex beds, sailed further than anyone before, down the African coast, out into the Atlantic, following rumours of purple shells. They established outposts, not colonies exactly, more like processing stations, places to collect murex, do initial processing, ship semi-finished dye back home. The purple network spread across the Mediterranean. Cultural exchange followed trade. Purple merchants became ambassadors, spreading Canaanite customs, Canaanite gods, Canaanite writing, especially writing. You needed the alphabet to run a complex trade network. Purple appeared in art everywhere. Egyptian paintings showed pharaohs in purple robes. Assyrian reliefs depicted purple textiles. Greek poets wrote about purple seas. The colour entered humanity's imagination. It became sacred. The tabernacle descriptions in later Hebrew texts specify purple cloth. Greek gods wore purple. Roman emperors would claim purple as imperial privilege. But it all started here, on the Canaanite coast. The environmental cost was significant. Those mountains of shells represented ecological devastation. Murex populations crashed. Divers had to go deeper, further from shore. Work got more dangerous, more expensive. Some areas never recovered. Bays that once teemed with murex became empty. The seafloor littered with broken shells. Nothing left alive. The first industrial extinction, maybe. The cities tried management. Seasonal restrictions, size limits, reserved breeding areas, but demand always won. Too much money at stake, too much power. The exploitation continued. Working conditions in the purple factories were harsh. The smell was overwhelming, the hours long, the work repetitive. Extracting glands from millions of snails destroyed hands, created permanent injuries. But it paid well. Better than farming. Better than most crafts. Purple workers could afford things, send children to scribal schools, buy property, move up in society. The purple ladder was steep but real. The trade created specialists, divers who knew every murex bed, shell crackers with perfect technique, dye masters who could judge colour by smell, merchants who understood international markets, each role essential, each well paid. Women worked in purple too, especially in the cloth preparation, the dyeing, the quality control. Some became wealthy. Purple widows who inherited businesses, ran them successfully, expanded them. The Purple Guild was powerful, maybe the most powerful in the ancient world. They set prices, standards, training requirements, controlled who could make purple, who could sell it, who could even learn the techniques. Knowledge was passed carefully, master to apprentice, father to son, sometimes daughter. Written records were minimal, too dangerous. If enemies learned the secrets, the monopoly would end. Canaan's advantage would disappear, but hints survive. Chemical analysis of ancient purple cloth reveals sophisticated chemistry, multiple dye baths, precise pH control, temperature regulation. These weren't primitive people stumbling through, they were scientists. Without the word, but scientists nonetheless. The purple trade funded everything else: shipbuilding, metalworking, architecture, art. The wealth from purple built the temples, paid for the armies, supported the scribes who refined the alphabet. It also created the merchant marine tradition. Canaanite sailors became the best in the world, not through warfare, through trade. They knew every current, every wind, every harbour from Spain to the Black Sea. Navigation improved, star knowledge, coastal markers, dead reckoning, all driven by the need to move purple safely, quickly, profitably. The purple fleets pioneered routes later civilizations would follow. By 1000 BCE, purple was Canaan. Mention Tyre or Sidon, people thought purple. The connection was absolute. Even the name stuck. Phoenicians, the Greeks called them, the purple people, the red purple people. But success bred imitation. Eventually, other cultures kept trying, kept experimenting, found other sources of purple, not as good, but cheaper, much cheaper. The monopoly began to crack. Plant dyes improved. Lichen purple, madder mixed with indigo, still not Tyrian purple, but purple enough for those who couldn't afford the real thing. The market segmented, true purple for the elite, fake purple for everyone else. The Canaanites adapted, went up market, made their purple even more exclusive, even more expensive, developed new shades, new techniques, stayed ahead through innovation. But the real threat wasn't competition. It was politics. As empires rose, they wanted purple. Not just to buy, to control. The purple cities found themselves targets. Their wealth made them valuable. Their independence made them vulnerable. Still, for over 1,000 years, purple meant Canaan. The colour of kings was the gift of a small coastal people, who turned sea snails into wealth, smell into power, colour into legend. The purple makers were artists and chemists, merchants and explorers. They took what the sea provided, transformed it, sent it across the world. In doing so, they transformed themselves, from coastal traders to international powers. But purple was just one product. The Canaanites had something else to trade, something that lasted even longer than their famous dye, something made from the mountains behind their cities, the cedars of Lebanon, and the ships that carried the world. The purple traders needed ships, good ships, great ships, ships that could carry fortunes across angry seas, ships that could sail for weeks without seeing land, ships that could survive storms, pirates, and time itself. The Canaanites had something no other seafaring people possessed. Behind their coastal cities rose mountains, and on those mountains grew trees unlike any others, the cedars of Lebanon. If you've never seen a Lebanon cedar, it's hard to understand. These weren't just big trees, they were monuments, living monuments. Some grew over 100 feet tall, trunks 30 feet around. They'd been growing since before the pyramids were built. The wood was perfect, strong but flexible, light but durable. It resisted rot, repelled insects, even smelled good. When you cut cedar, the scent filled the air, clean, sharp, the smell of possibility. But the cedars grew high in the mountains. Getting them down to the coast took engineering, planning, muscle. Entire communities devoted themselves to the cedar trade. Woodcutters, transport teams, specialists who knew exactly which trees to cut, which to save. Because you couldn't just cut every cedar. Cut too many and erosion destroyed the mountainsides. The Canaanites learned this early, started managing their forests, replanting, rotating cutting areas. They needed the cedars to last forever. The logs came down on sleds. In winter, when snow made sliding easier, teams of oxen pulled them. Men guided them around cliffs, through valleys. It took weeks to move a single large log from mountain to sea. At the coast, the real magic began. Canaanite shipwrights had been building boats for thousands of years, each generation learning from the last, improving, innovating. By 1500 BCE, they were the best in the world. They invented the keel. That's the backbone of a ship, the strong beam that runs along the bottom. Before keels, boats were basically floating bowls, fine for rivers, dangerous at sea. Keels changed everything, made ships directionally stable, able to sail straight, resist rolling. They developed frame-first construction. Instead of building the hull and hoping it held together, they built a skeleton first. Ribs of cedar, then attached planks. This made ships stronger, more predictable. You could build bigger ships, much bigger. The joints were works of art. Mortise and tenon, dovetails, scarf joints that got stronger under pressure. No nails at first. Just wood fitted so perfectly water couldn't penetrate. Later, bronze nails, but sparingly. The joints did the real work. Caulking came from pine resin, mixed with fibers, pounded into seams. It hardened under water, stayed flexible enough to move with the wood, kept ships watertight for years. Another Canaanite innovation that everyone else copied. The sails were linen at first, later wool, square sails for running with the wind. The Canaanites experimented with different rigging, ways to angle sails, catch quartering winds, not just run before the wind like everyone else. But the real innovation was in hull design. Canaanite ships were beamier than others, wider for their length. This made them slower but more stable, more cargo capacity, perfect for traders who valued profits over speed. They built different ships for different purposes. Coastal traders, shallow draft, easy to beach, deep-sea merchants, high sides, sealed cargo holds, war galleys, long and narrow, built for ramming. The biggest merchant ships were incredible. 60 feet long, maybe more, multiple decks, cabins for passengers, holds for cargo, pens for livestock, everything needed for weeks at sea. Navigation was an art. No compasses yet, no real maps. But the Canaanites developed systems, star navigation first, not just the North Star, whole constellations, rising and setting points that told latitude. They kept coastal sailing directions, written in the alphabet they'd invented. From Tyre, sail toward the setting sun 2 days, look for the mountain that looks like a sleeping woman, harbour on the north side, good water, friendly locals. These sailing directions were closely guarded, passed from captain to captain, updated each voyage, the accumulated knowledge of centuries, worth more than any cargo. They understood winds, seasonal patterns, the westerlies that blew in summer, the storms that came with winter, when to sail, when to wait, when to run for harbour. Timing was survival, but they also took risks, sailed when others wouldn't, went places others feared. The Atlantic beyond the Pillars of Hercules, down the African coast into the unknown, maybe further, much further. Stories persist of Canaanite ships reaching Britain, Ireland, maybe even America. Most historians doubt it. But Canaanite ships have been found far from where anyone expected. They definitely went places we're still discovering. The colonies started as trading posts, safe harbours, watering places, storage facilities. A Canaanite merchant sailing to Spain needed stops along the way, places to repair, resupply, trade local goods. Cyprus came first, rich in copper, perfect position, then Malta, Sicily, Sardinia, each colony strategically placed, a day's sail apart in good weather, creating a chain of safe harbours across the Mediterranean. But the colonies became more than trading posts. People stayed, married locals, had children, built temples to Canaanite gods, used the Canaanite alphabet, created hybrid cultures, Canaanite but different. Carthage was the greatest colony, founded by Tyre around 814 BCE. The story says Queen Dido led refugees from political turmoil. Maybe true, maybe legend, but Carthage became a power, eventually rivaling its mother city. The ships carried everything: purple cloth, cedar logs, bronze tools, wine in ceramic jars, olive oil, grain, slaves, ideas, gods. The ships were the arteries of ancient civilization, but they carried something else too: stories. Sailors are storytellers, always have been. Canaanite sailors spread tales across the ancient world. Some became legends, some became religious texts, some we're still unravelling. The story of a great flood, a hero who built a boat, saved animals, survived divine wrath. Sound familiar? Versions appear everywhere Canaanite ships sailed, each culture adapting it, making it their own. Sea monsters, islands of the blessed, lands where the sun never sets. These weren't just fantasies. They were garbled reports from real voyages, real encounters, transformed by telling and retelling. The ships shaped language too. Maritime terms entered every language, words for wind, waves, navigation. Many trace back to Canaanite origins. The vocabulary of the sea spread with the ships. Ship ownership was complex. Sometimes a single merchant owned a ship, more often shares. Multiple investors spreading risk. If the ship sank, no one lost everything. If it returned, everyone profited. Contracts survive on clay tablets, detailed agreements, who pays for what, how profits split, what happens in different scenarios, maritime law developing, becoming sophisticated, still recognizable today. The captains were professionals, not just sailors, businessmen, diplomats. They negotiated in foreign ports, dealt with local officials, made decisions that could make or break fortunes. Good captains were rich, great ones were legendary. Crews were international. A Canaanite ship might have Egyptian sailors, Greek navigators, African dock workers. The ships were floating cities, mixing cultures, creating the first truly international community. Life aboard wasn't easy. Crowded conditions, simple food, hard work. Storms could kill everyone. Pirates were real threats. Disease spread quickly in confined spaces, but the pay was good. The adventures real. Some sailors spent their whole lives at sea, born on ships, died on ships, knew every harbour from Spain to Egypt, could smell weather changes, feel currents through the hull, human dolphins who belonged more to sea than land. The ships influenced architecture, techniques for bending wood, joining beams, waterproofing, all transferred to buildings. Canaanite roof beams looked like inverted hulls because shipwrights built them. They also influenced warfare. Naval battles were rare at first. Ships were too valuable to risk. But eventually conflict came to the sea. The Canaanites developed ramming tactics, marine soldiers, naval strategies still studied today. The environmental impact was significant. Those beautiful cedars started disappearing. First the easy ones near the coast, then higher up the mountains. Some areas were completely deforested, the bare slopes still visible today. Other trees suffered too, oak for ribs, pine for resin. Whole forests fed the shipyards. The landscape changed, permanently, the price of maritime dominance. But the benefits seemed worth it. Ships brought wealth, connections, knowledge. Canaanite cities thrived on sea trade, became cosmopolitan, international, centers of learning and culture. The shipbuilding knowledge spread slowly. The Canaanites trained others, but kept the best techniques secret, like purple dyeing. Shipbuilding was a strategic advantage, protected, preserved, passed carefully to the next generation. Yet innovation continued. Better sail plans, stronger joints, larger ships. By 1000 BCE, Canaanite ships dominated Mediterranean trade, not through military might, through superior technology. Better boats simply outcompeted others. The legacy lasted. When Romans finally built a real navy, they copied Carthaginian designs. Carthaginian designs that traced back to Canaanite origins. When Vikings perfected their longships, they used techniques Canaanites pioneered. Every wooden ship built for the next 2,000 years owed something to Canaanite innovation. The keel, the frame, the sailing techniques, the navigation methods, all gifts from a people who turned trees into dreams. But ships were just tools. What mattered was what they carried, not just purple and cedar, but ideas, beliefs, ways of seeing the world. The Canaanite ships carried gods across the sea, and those gods would transform how humanity understood divinity itself. The ships that carried purple and cedar also carried something invisible, something that couldn't be weighed or counted, but something that would outlast both the dye and the wood. The Canaanite understanding of the divine. Every Canaanite city had its gods, not different gods exactly, the same gods with local variations, like a family spread across different houses. Each house had its favourites, its special relationships, but they all acknowledged the family. At the head of this divine family sat El, the Father, the Creator, the wise old god who lived on a cosmic mountain where two rivers met. Not a real mountain, not rivers you could sail. This was the geography of the divine realm, the place where gods gathered, where decisions were made. El was old, really old, older than the other gods, grey-bearded in the stories, patient, slow to anger, the kind of father who listened before speaking, who thought before acting, very different from the young, hot-headed gods who were always fighting. His wife was a Thyrot, sometimes called Asherah, mother of the gods, literally. She'd given birth to 70 divine sons, maybe daughters too. The texts aren't clear, but definitely a lot of divine children, each with their own personality, their own sphere of influence. The most famous son was Baal, not his real name. Baal just meant Lord. His real name was Hadad, but everyone called him Baal, the Storm Lord, the one who brought rain. And in a land where rain meant life or death, Baal mattered. A lot. Baal was everything El wasn't. Young, violent, passionate. He fought sea monsters, battled death itself, died and came back. His stories were action-packed, full of drama, the kind of stories young men loved, old farmers too when they needed rain. The Baal cycle, found in the ruins of Ugarit, tells his story, how he fought Yam, the sea god, Mot, the god of death, how he built his palace on Mount Zaphon, how he brought fertility to the land. These weren't simple fairy tales. They were complex literature, poetry that rivals anything from Greece or Mesopotamia. But here's what's interesting. Baal dies in the story, goes down to the underworld, the earth dries up, crops fail, El mourns, Asherah mourns, even Anat, Baal's violent sister, mourns. Then she gets angry, really angry. Anat goes to the underworld, finds Mot, cuts him up with a sword, grinds him in a mill, scatters him in the fields, and somehow this brings Baal back. Rain returns, crops grow, life continues. Sound familiar? It should. Dying and rising gods appear everywhere in the ancient world. But this is one of the oldest versions we have, written down, preserved, thanks to the alphabet the Canaanites invented. The temples where these gods lived weren't just religious buildings, they were economic centers, political centers, social centers. The biggest building in any Canaanite city was usually the temple, sometimes multiple temples. Take the temple at Hazor, massive stone foundations, multiple rooms, courtyards for gatherings, storerooms for offerings, workshops for making religious items. It was a complex, a corporation, the Microsoft of the Bronze Age. Priests ran these operations, but not like later priests. These were managers, accountants, diplomats. They controlled vast wealth, owned land, made loans. The Temple of Baal might own the best farmland, rent it out, use the profits to maintain the building, pay for festivals. The festivals were spectacular. We know from texts and archaeology, whole cities shut down, everyone participated, rich and poor, free and slave, because the god's favour affected everyone. If Baal was happy, rain came. If he wasn't, drought. The New Year festival was the biggest, celebrated in autumn, when the first rain should come. The king played a special role. He might represent Baal, fight ritual battles, perform sacred marriages. The details varied by city, but the purpose was the same, ensure divine favour for another year. But Canaanite religion wasn't just big public festivals. Every house had shrines, small altars, figurines of gods and goddesses, especially female figurines. Hundreds have been found. Maybe Asherah, maybe local goddesses. Definitely important to daily life. People made personal vows. If Baal sends rain, I'll sacrifice a lamb. If Asherah protects my pregnancy, I'll dedicate my child to temple service. These weren't empty promises. Fulfilling vows mattered. Breaking them brought divine punishment. The dead needed attention too. Canaanites believed the dead lived on, somewhere underground. They needed food, drink, remembrance. Families made offerings at tombs, held memorial meals, told stories about ancestors. Some texts suggest the dead could be consulted, through dreams, through specialists who knew how to contact them. Not quite ancestor worship, but ancestor respect. The dead were still family, still part of the community. This connection between living and dead, human and divine, shaped Canaanite thinking. The universe had levels, the heavens where El lived, the earth where humans lived, the underworld where the dead lived. But the boundaries were permeable. Gods visited earth, humans became divine, the dead influenced the living. Kings claimed divine connections, not that they were gods, usually, but that gods chose them, spoke through them. The king was the link between human and divine. His righteousness brought blessing, his sins brought catastrophe. We see this in royal inscriptions. I, King so-and-so, beloved of Baal, built this temple. El chose me to rule. Asherah guides my decisions. Not just propaganda. People believed it. The king's relationship with gods mattered, but priests balanced royal power. They interpreted divine will, performed rituals the king couldn't, controlled temple wealth the king needed. It was a complex dance. King and priest. Human authority and divine authority. sometimes cooperating, sometimes competing. The rituals themselves were elaborate. We know some details from texts and archaeology. Animal sacrifice was central, not random killing, precise procedures, the right animal, the right age, the right condition, killed the right way, blood handled correctly, different offerings for different purposes, burnt offerings where the whole animal was consumed by fire, peace offerings where humans and gods shared the meal, sin offerings to restore broken relationships, thank offerings for blessings received. But not just animals, grain offerings, wine libations, incense that filled temples with sweet smoke, oil poured on sacred stones. Each offering had meaning, rules, purposes. The gods had preferences, standards, expectations. Music played a huge role. We found lyrics, references to instruments, harps, drums, flutes, clashing cymbals. Temple music must have been overwhelming, loud, rhythmic, designed to alter consciousness, create religious experience, dance too, ritual movements, probably ecstatic dancing. Prophets working themselves into trances, speaking divine words or nonsense. The line between religious experience and performance was thin, maybe non-existent. The controversial stuff? Yes, it existed. Sacred prostitution, maybe. The texts are unclear. Scholars argue. But temples definitely had women and men with religious sexual roles. What exactly they did, we're not sure. But sexuality and religion mixed in ways that make moderns uncomfortable. Child sacrifice. The worst accusation. Did Canaanites really burn children for the gods? Some evidence says yes, other evidence says no. Maybe only in extreme circumstances. Terrible droughts, city sieges. When nothing else worked, it's the darkest corner of Canaanite religion. Still debated. But focusing only on the dark ignores the light. Canaanite religion gave people structure, meaning, community. It explained why rain came or didn't, why some prospered and others suffered. It provided comfort in grief, hope in despair, and it influenced everyone it touched. Egyptian gods started looking Canaanite. Mesopotamian myths borrowed Canaanite themes. Greek gods? Many have Canaanite ancestors. Aphrodite from Astarte, Adonis from Adon. The connections are clear, but the biggest influence was on what came after. The Hebrew Bible preserves Canaanite imagery. El becomes a name for God. Baal's titles transfer to Yahweh. Rider on the clouds. Defeater of the sea. These are Baal's accomplishments, later given to Israel's God. The very structure of divinity. A cosmic mountain where God dwells. Divine councils where decisions are made. Angels as divine messengers. All have Canaanite roots, transformed, monotheized, but recognizably connected. Even specific passages echo Canaanite literature. Psalms that could be Baal hymns with names changed. Wisdom literature that sounds like El speaking. The influence is pervasive, fundamental, usually unacknowledged. This makes sense. The Israelites emerged from Canaanite culture, spoke a Canaanite language, lived in Canaanite cities. Their religion didn't appear from nowhere. It grew from Canaanite soil, changed, evolved, became something new, but the roots remained. The archaeological evidence is fascinating. Israelite sites from early periods look Canaanite. Same pottery, same house styles, same religious objects. The differences developed slowly, over centuries, not overnight revelation, gradual transformation. This bothers some people. They want clear distinctions. Canaanite bad, Israelite good. But history is messier, more interesting. The Canaanites gave the world alphabetic writing, maritime technology, and yes, religious concepts that billions still use. Their understanding of divinity wasn't primitive. It was sophisticated, complex. It dealt with real human concerns, justice and injustice, life and death, meaning and meaninglessness. The same concerns religion still address. The cosmic mountain where El-Sat still appears in religious imagery. God's throne, heaven, paradise. The place where divine and human meet. We've just forgotten where the image originated. In Canaanite minds, preserved in Canaanite texts, spread by Canaanite ships. But the Canaanite gods couldn't protect their people from everything, especially not from the great empires that were starting to notice this wealthy strip of land. The cosmic mountain was about to meet earthly power, and earthly power had bronze weapons, trained armies, imperial ambitions. Geography is destiny. Whoever said that must have been thinking about Canaan. Look at a map, any map of the ancient world. There's Canaan, right in the middle, the only land route between Africa and Asia, between Egypt and everywhere else. For centuries this had been a blessing. Caravans passed through, paid tolls, bought supplies, traded goods. Canaanite cities got rich just by being on the road. But roads run both ways, and by 1500 BCE the great empires were marching. Egypt woke up first. For centuries Egypt had been content with Egypt. The Nile Valley was rich, defensible, self-contained. Why bother with the outside world? Let the outside world come to Egypt. Buy grain, marvel at pyramids, go home. But things changed. Foreign rulers called the Hyksos had conquered northern Egypt, ruled for a century. When the Egyptians finally kicked them out, they followed them north, into Canaan, and they liked what they saw. Rich cities, profitable trade routes, strategic positions, and no unified resistance. Each Canaanite city looked after itself, made its own decisions, which meant they could be conquered one at a time, or better yet, controlled without conquering. Thutmose III was the pharaoh who figured it out. Smart man, great general, but also a realist. He knew Egypt couldn't actually rule Canaan. Too far away, too many cities, too expensive. But Egypt could dominate it, make it profitable, keep it weak. His solution was brilliant and cynical. Leave the Canaanite kings in place. Let them keep their crowns, their palaces, their local power, but make them swear loyalty to Egypt, pay tribute, follow Egyptian foreign policy, become vassals. Most Canaanite kings saw the wisdom in this. The alternative was destruction. Egyptian armies were professional, disciplined, well-equipped. They had chariots, thousands of them, composite bows that could punch through armor, siege equipment. The Canaanite cities were strong, but not that strong. Still, some resisted. A coalition formed, led by the king of Kadesh, supported by cities like Megiddo. They gathered their armies, waited for the Egyptians at the fortress city of Megiddo, the crossroads of Canaan. Control Megiddo, control everything. What happened next was history, literally. The Battle of Megiddo in 1457 BCE is the first battle in human history with detailed records. We know Thutmose's route, his tactics, the aftermath, all carved in stone, preserved in hieroglyphs. Thutmose had 3 routes to Megiddo. 2 were safe but long, 1 was dangerous but direct. Through a narrow pass where his army would stretch out. Vulnerable. His generals advised the safe routes. Thutmose chose the dangerous one. Brilliant or lucky? Both, maybe. The coalition didn't expect him to risk the narrow pass. They'd split their forces to cover the safe routes. When Thutmose burst through the pass, he caught them off guard, scattered, unprepared. The battle was brutal, but brief. Egyptian discipline won. Chariots smashed through Canaanite lines. Infantry followed up. The coalition broke, fled. Many made it back to Megiddo, slammed the gates, prepared for siege. But something strange happened. The Egyptian soldiers stopped to loot the battlefield. Rich Canaanite armor, weapons, supplies. By the time Thutmose restored order, organized pursuit, it was too late. The survivors were behind walls. The siege lasted 7 months. 7 months of Egyptian soldiers surrounding Megiddo, building their own walls, counter-walls, preventing food from entering. Water was no problem. Megiddo had springs, but food ran out. Surrender was inevitable. When Megiddo fell, Thutmose showed political genius. He didn't destroy the city, didn't massacre the population, didn't even execute most of the rebel leaders. Instead, he took their children, not as slaves, as guests, hostages with education. These children went to Egypt, learned Egyptian ways, Egyptian language, Egyptian loyalty. When their fathers died, they returned as kings, but Egyptian-educated kings, Egyptian-friendly kings, brilliant long-term strategy. The tribute system was equally clever, not too heavy, not too light, enough to remind Canaanite cities who was boss, not enough to provoke rebellion, paid annually, gold, silver, precious goods, but also information, intelligence, loyalty demonstrated through reports. Egyptian governors appeared in major cities, not rulers, advisors, observers. The local king still ruled, but the governor watched, reported, made sure Egyptian interests were protected. A light touch, but firm. For the Canaanite cities it wasn't all bad. Egyptian protection meant safety from other threats. Raiders from the desert, pirates from the sea, other empires from the north. Egypt's enemies became their enemies. Egypt's protection became their shield. Trade flourished under Egyptian oversight. Egyptian merchants needed Canaanite ports. Canaanite merchants gained access to Egyptian markets. The purple of Tyre appeared in pharaonic tombs. Cedar from Lebanon built Egyptian temples. Everyone profited. Cultural exchange exploded. Egyptian gods appeared in Canaanite temples, not replacing local gods, standing beside them. Syncretism, the merging of divine identities. Baal became associated with Egyptian Seth, Astarte with Hathor. Religious fusion. Canaanite craftsmen went to Egypt, worked on royal projects, learned Egyptian techniques, brought them home. Egyptian artistic styles influenced Canaanite art, but Canaanite innovations influenced Egypt too. The alphabet began appearing in Egyptian mines. Workers' graffiti, practical adoption. The Amarna letters show us this world in detail, found in the ruins of Akhenaten's capital. Nearly 400 clay tablets, diplomatic correspondence, mostly from Canaanite kings to the pharaoh, written in Akkadian, the diplomatic language, but full of Canaanite words, local colour. The letters are amazing, personal, emotional, sometimes desperate. To the king, my lord, my God, my son, I fall at the feet of the king, my lord, 7 times and 7 times. Standard opening. Then the real message. The king of Sidon attacks my cities. Send help. My neighbours plot against me. I remain loyal. I need gold to finish the temple to your divine father. My daughter is beautiful, perfect for your harem. Reading between the lines is fascinating. The constant manoeuvring. Cities accusing each other of disloyalty, trying to gain Egyptian favour, playing angles. Politics hasn't changed much in 300-500 years. One name appears repeatedly, Abdi-Heba of Jerusalem, desperately loyal, constantly threatened, begging for Egyptian troops, just a small garrison, anything. His letters get increasingly panicked. We don't know if help ever came, but the letters show something important. The Canaanite kings weren't powerless puppets. They had room to maneuver, make alliances, fight local wars. As long as tribute flowed and Egyptian interests were protected, they had freedom. Some cities did better than others. Byblos practically became Egyptian. Its kings took Egyptian names, built Egyptian-style temples, prospered as Egypt's main cedar supplier. Other cities kept more independence, paid tribute, otherwise ignored Egypt. The situation created opportunities. Smart kings played Egypt against local rivals. My enemy refuses to pay tribute. True or not, it might bring Egyptian intervention. Useful for settling scores, Egyptian power as a weapon in local politics. But Egypt wasn't the only empire interested in Canaan. To the north, the Hittites were rising, based in Anatolia, expanding south. By 1350 BCE, they were pushing into northern Canaan, creating a volatile situation. Canaanite cities in the north faced a dilemma: stay loyal to distant Egypt, switch to the closer Hittites, try to play both sides. Different cities chose different strategies. Some switched allegiance back and forth, following the tide of imperial power. The city of Kadesh became the flashpoint. Strategic location, strong walls, it changed hands repeatedly: Egyptian, Hittite, Egyptian again. Finally, the two empires met in battle there. 1274 BCE, the Battle of Kadesh, largest chariot battle ever fought. The battle was indecisive. Both sides claimed victory. Both sides went home. But the real result was recognition. Neither empire could dominate the other. They needed accommodation, treaties, boundaries, spheres of influence. The treaty they signed was remarkable, preserved in both Egyptian and Hittite versions: mutual defense, extradition of refugees, recognition of boundaries, the first international peace treaty. And Canaan was divided: south to Egypt, north to the Hittites. The cities in between, they managed. For Canaanite cities, this was perfect. Two empires meant options, leverage. If Egypt demanded too much, threatened to side with the Hittites. If the Hittites pushed too hard, call on Egyptian protection. Balance of power politics, ancient style. The cultural mixing intensified. Egyptian, Hittite, and Canaanite traditions blended. Architecture showed all three influences. Religious practices merged. Languages borrowed from each other. Canaan became truly cosmopolitan, the ancient world's melting pot. But playing empires against each other was dangerous. Required skilled diplomacy, good intelligence, perfect timing. Some cities managed brilliantly, others miscalculated, paid the price: destruction or occupation. The game had high stakes. Individual stories from this period are remarkable. Canaanite princes educated in Egypt. Returning home changed. Canaanite princesses married to foreign nobles, creating international alliances, merchants crossing hostile boundaries, risking everything for profit. The period also saw technological exchange: Egyptian medicine, Hittite ironworking, Canaanite navigation. Knowledge flowed along with goods. Canaan's position between empires made it a clearinghouse for innovation. Ideas met, mixed, merged, spread. Military techniques especially crossed borders: Egyptian chariot warfare, Hittite siegecraft, Canaanite naval tactics. Each empire learned from contact with the others, often through Canaanite intermediaries. The cities might be vassals, but they were educated vassals. The religious influence went deep. Egyptian concepts of afterlife influenced Canaanite burial practices. Hittite storm gods merged with Canaanite Baal. Divine kingship ideologies from both empires shaped how Canaanite rulers presented themselves. Cultural DNA mixing at the deepest level. But empires rise and fall. By 1200 BCE, both Egypt and the Hittites were weakening. Internal problems, economic stress, military overextension. The delicate balance that had defined Canaan for 3 centuries was about to collapse. Something was coming. From the sea, from the north, from everywhere and nowhere. The Canaanite cities had survived between empires through diplomacy, trade, flexibility. But what was coming couldn't be negotiated with, couldn't be bribed, couldn't be balanced. The world was about to end. Not the physical world, but the political, economic and social world that had existed for 1,000 years. The Bronze Age was dying, and it would take the great empires with it. Leave Canaan exposed, vulnerable, forever changed. While empires played their games, one Canaanite city was writing its greatest chapter, Ugarit, a port city on the Syrian coast, not the biggest, not the richest, but for 2 centuries the most creative, the most literate, the most cosmopolitan. Ugarit shouldn't have been special. medium-sized port, decent harbour, good farmland nearby, but nothing extraordinary until you dig deeper, literally. When French archaeologists started excavating in 1929, they found something nobody expected, a complete library. Not just any library, tablets in 8 different languages. 8. Egyptian hieroglyphs, Mesopotamian cuneiform, Hittite, Hurrian, Cypro-Minoan, and 3 different alphabetic scripts, including Ugarit's own alphabet. 30 letters adapted perfectly for their dialect. This tells us something important. Ugarit wasn't isolated. It was connected, deeply connected, to everyone, everywhere. The tablets show correspondence with Egypt, treaties with the Hittites, trade agreements with Cyprus, letters to Assyria. Ugarit was talking to the whole world. But they weren't just talking, they were creating. The mythological texts from Ugarit are extraordinary. The Baal cycle we mentioned, that's from Ugarit, but also the legend of Keret, the tale of Akhat, stories that predate Homer, maybe influenced Homer, certainly influenced everything that came after. The Baal cycle alone is over 1,000 lines, complex poetry, multiple narrators, sophisticated literary devices. This wasn't folk tales around a campfire, this was literature, real literature, with authors who knew what they were doing. The story is epic. Baal fights Yam, the sea god, wins, becomes king of the gods, builds his palace, gets cocky, challenges Mot, death itself, loses, dies, goes to the underworld, the earth dries up, El mourns, Anat rescues him, life returns. But it's how the story is told that matters. The language is beautiful, even in translation. Baal sends forth his voice from the clouds. He flashes lightning to the earth. Mot's appetite is the appetite of lions in the wilderness, or the desire of dolphins in the sea. These weren't primitive people making up simple stories. These were artists, working with words like smiths worked with bronze, crafting, refining, creating beauty that would last forever. The palace archives tell different stories, economic ones. Ugarit was rich, really rich. The tablets record massive transactions, hundreds of talents of silver, thousands of jars of oil, ship after ship of goods flowing through the port. But what made Ugarit rich wasn't just trade, it was value-added trade. They didn't just ship raw materials, they processed them, manufactured, improved. Purple cloth arrived from Tyre. Ugarit's workshops made it into garments, sold for 10 times the price. The metalworkers were legendary. Not just bronze, gold, silver, electrum, complex alloys, decorative techniques nobody else could match. An Ugaritic bowl or weapon was a status symbol, worth fortunes, desired by kings everywhere. The ivory carvers were even better. Elephant ivory from Africa, hippopotamus ivory from Egypt, carved into incredible pieces, furniture inlays, cosmetic boxes, religious objects, so fine they look impossible, even now, with modern tools. How did one city produce so much excellence? The answer is in those 8 languages. Ugarit welcomed everyone, Egyptians fleeing political turmoil, Hittite craftsmen seeking new markets, Mesopotamian scribes looking for work, Mycenaean merchants from across the sea. The city was genuinely multicultural, not just different groups living separately, but mixing, intermarrying, learning from each other. The tablets show us Egyptian names with Canaanite titles, Hittite princes married to Ugaritic princesses, Hurrian priests serving Canaanite gods. The religious texts show this mixing beautifully. The gods have multiple names, Canaanite and Hurrian, sometimes Hittite. The rituals blend traditions, Egyptian magical practices, Mesopotamian divination, local Canaanite customs, all combined into something new. The king of Ugarit managed this diversity brilliantly. The texts show careful diplomacy, balancing different groups, different interests. When Hittite merchants complained about taxes, he adjusted them. When Egyptian refugees needed protection, he provided it. When local farmers wanted better prices, He negotiated. The legal system was sophisticated. Different laws for different communities, but also common law that applied to everyone. Contract law especially. Had to be. With so much international trade, contracts needed to be enforceable, fair, predictable. The tablet labelled RS 17.130 is fascinating. A legal case. A merchant from Crete died in Ugarit. No family there. Who inherits his goods? The king's decision is brilliant. Follows Cretan law for personal property, Ugaritic law for real estate, satisfies everyone. Education flourished. The scribal school texts survive. Practice tablets where students learn to write, not just copying, composing. We have their homework, their mistakes, their gradual improvement. You can watch ancient students becoming literate. They learned multiple scripts because they needed them. A merchant might receive a letter in Akkadian, need to write a response in Egyptian, keep records in alphabetic Ugaritic. Multilingual literacy was professional necessity. The scientific texts are surprising. Medical treatments that actually work. Veterinary medicine for horses. Mathematical problems with correct solutions. Astronomical observations tracking planet movements. Ugarit was contributing to human knowledge, not just preserving it. The architecture reflected this sophistication. The royal palace covered 2.5 acres, 90 rooms, multiple courtyards, gardens with imported plants, running water through clay pipes, toilets with drainage systems. This was luxury, even by modern standards, but also practical. Storerooms full of goods, archives organized by subject, workshops attached to the palace. The king wasn't just ruling, he was running a business empire. The palace was corporate headquarters. The religious architecture was equally impressive. Multiple temples, not just to Canaanite gods, a chapel for Egyptian residents, shrines for Hurrian deities, religious tolerance as policy. Everyone could worship. Everyone did. The Temple of Baal dominated the Acropolis. Massive stone foundations, tall pillars, inner sanctum where only priests could go, but also public courtyards, where everyone gathered for festivals, religion as community building. The port district was its own world, warehouses from different nations, each with their own style, Egyptian mudrick, Mycenaean stone, local techniques. You could tell who owned what just by looking. Architecture as identity. Ships from everywhere crowded the harbour. The tablets record their origins: Alashiya, Cyprus; Kaptara, Crete; Egypt, the Aegean Islands, each bringing unique goods, taking Ugaritic products. The port never slept. The diversity created problems too. The texts hint at tensions. Local workers complaining about foreign competition. Foreign merchants claiming discrimination. Religious conflicts when someone's god was insulted. The king constantly mediating, keeping peace. But mostly it worked. For 200 years Ugarit thrived. Through Egyptian domination, Hittite control, the transition between empires, the city adapted, survived, prospered, seemed eternal. The last texts from Ugarit are haunting, around 1200 BCE, desperate letters. Ships of the enemy have come, they have burned my towns, done evil things in my country. My father, the enemy's ships are coming, my cities are burned. The responses never arrived, or if they did, nobody was left to read them. Ugarit burned, totally, finally. The inhabitants fled or died. The city was never rebuilt, never reoccupied, which is why we have it, preserved in destruction. The fire that destroyed Ugarit also preserved it, baked those clay tablets, made them permanent, turned tragedy into archaeology's gain. We can read the last days, feel the panic, understand the end, but also understand the achievement. For 2 centuries, Ugarit showed what Canaanite culture could accomplish. Given peace, given prosperity, given freedom to create, they produced literature, art, science, law, everything we associate with civilization. They also showed how diversity could work. Different peoples, different languages, different gods, living together, working together, creating together. It wasn't perfect, but it was remarkable, especially for the Bronze Age. The influence of Ugarit outlived the city. Those stories, they spread. Influenced biblical narratives, Greek myths. The alphabet they perfected. It evolved, became the Phoenician alphabet, then Greek, then Latin, then this. Refugees from Ugarit fled everywhere, took their knowledge, their skills, their memories, started over in new places, contributed to new cultures. The city died, but its gifts to humanity lived on. When French archaeologists found Ugarit, they couldn't believe it. A complete ancient city, frozen in time, with its own literature, its own voice, speaking across 3,000 years, telling us who they were, what they believed, how they lived. The tablets are still being translated, still revealing secrets, each one a window into a vanished world, a world that was ending even as Ugarit flourished. Because those enemy ships, they were just the beginning. The entire Bronze Age was about to collapse, and nobody saw it coming. The letters started arriving around 1200 BCE. Desperate messages pressed into clay, from coastal cities, from islands, from everywhere, all saying the same thing: they're coming, by sea, burning everything. Help us. Nobody knows exactly who they were. We call them the Sea Peoples, because that's what the Egyptians called them, but it's not really a name, more like a description. Peoples from the sea, mysterious, terrifying, unstoppable. The Egyptian records give us names: Shurden, Luca, Peliset, Cheka, Denian. But names don't tell us much. Where did they come from? Why did they attack? Why now? Why everywhere at once? 3,000 years later, we're still arguing. What we know is what they did. They destroyed. Completely. Finally. Cities that had stood for 1,000 years vanished in flames. Ugarit, Hattusa, Mycenae, Troy, Ashkelon, Hazor. The list goes on and on. This wasn't normal warfare. Armies had always destroyed cities, but then they occupied them, rebuilt, ruled. The Sea Peoples didn't. They burned and moved on, left ruins, silence, nothing. The Hittite Empire collapsed. Just gone. One decade they're negotiating with Egypt. The next, their capital is ashes, their lands empty, their people scattered. An empire that had dominated Anatolia for centuries, erased. The Mycenaean palaces burned. Everyone. These weren't weak cities. They had massive walls, professional armies. They'd ruled the Aegean for generations. Didn't matter. The palaces burned. The culture that would inspire Homer's epics. Gone. Egypt barely survived. And we know this because they recorded it. Rameses III fought the Sea Peoples in 1177 BCE, by land and sea. The temple walls at Medinet Habu show the battle. Egyptian order fighting chaos, ships ramming, soldiers drowning, desperate combat. The inscriptions are dramatic. Those who came forward together on the sea, the full flame was in front of them. Their confederation was the Peliset, Cheka, Shekelesh, Denyen, and Weshesh. They laid their hands upon the lands as far as the circuit of the earth. Egypt won. Barely. Pushed the invaders back. But victory exhausted them. Egypt never fully recovered. The new kingdom ended. The great age of pharaohs faded. They survived, but diminished. Forever weakened. For Canaan, the catastrophe was absolute. The archaeological evidence is stark. Destruction layers everywhere. Cities burned, abandoned, some forever. Others reoccupied much later, by different people, with different culture. Hazor tells the story. Massive city, powerful walls, rich palaces, thriving workshops, then fire, intense fire, hot enough to melt mud brick, crack stone. The palace collapsed into its own basement, sealed like a tomb. When archaeologists excavated, they found skeletons, unburied, where they fell. But here's what's strange. No siege equipment, no evidence of long battles. The cities just burned, as if overwhelmed suddenly, completely, before they could properly defend themselves. Some scholars think the Sea Peoples weren't invaders. They were refugees, displaced populations fleeing something worse. Climate change maybe, drought, famine, systems collapse, desperate people moving in waves, taking what they needed, burning what they couldn't use. The climate data supports this. Tree rings, lake sediments. They show severe drought around 1200 BCE. The worst in centuries. Crops failed, trade routes collapsed, food became scarce, then scarcer, then gone. When food runs out, civilization ends. People stop being citizens, become survivors. Morality changes, laws disappear. Take what you need, kill who stops you. Move on, keep moving, always moving. But refugees don't usually have advanced weapons, superior tactics, the ability to defeat professional armies. The Sea Peoples did. They had new technologies, new ways of fighting. That's not desperate refugees. That's organized military force. Maybe both. Refugee populations led by military elites, displaced warriors from collapsed kingdoms, mercenaries gone rogue, pirates taking advantage of chaos. We don't know. Can't know. They left no written records, no explanation, just destruction. The Canaanite cities tried to adapt. Some built new fortifications, stronger gates, higher walls. Didn't help. The archaeological evidence shows rushed construction, unfinished defences. They ran out of time. Others tried diplomacy. The last tablets from several cities mention negotiations, payments, attempts to redirect the attackers. We have no silver. We have no gold. Please go to our enemies instead. Desperate bargaining with death. Some cities switched sides, joined the attackers. Better to raid than be raided. The Shurden who attacked Egypt had fought for Egypt decades earlier. Mercenaries turned raiders. Loyalty was luxury nobody could afford. The trade networks collapsed completely. No purple ships, no cedar exports, no bronze caravans. The economy that had connected the ancient world, gone. Each region isolated, alone, trying to survive with local resources. Without tin imports, bronze production stopped. Without bronze tools, agriculture suffered. Without agricultural surplus, cities couldn't survive. Without cities, specialists disappeared. Scribes, smiths, shipwrights. The knowledge of generations, lost. Writing almost disappeared. The palace scribes were gone, their schools destroyed, their libraries burned. For centuries after 1200 BCE, we have almost no texts from former Canaanite lands. A dark age, literally. We can't read what isn't written. The social order collapsed. Kings without kingdoms, priests without temples, merchants without trade, farmers without markets, everyone reduced to subsistence, survival, day by day, existence. But people are resilient, adaptable. Some Canaanite cities survived, diminished, changed, but survived. Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, the coastal cities that would become Phoenician. They endured, somehow. Maybe their fleets helped. Ships could flee, escape burning cities, return when danger passed. Coastal cities had options landlocked ones didn't. The sea that brought destruction also offered escape. Or maybe they negotiated better, paid the right bribes, made the right alliances, convinced attackers they were more valuable alive than dead. Purple dye was still precious, even in chaos, especially in chaos. Luxury marks status when everything else fails. The Peliset, one of the Sea Peoples groups, settled the southern coast, became the Philistines, built 5 cities, Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, Gath. They brought new culture, Aegean pottery, different burial customs, different gods. But they also adopted local ways, learned the local language, worshipped local gods alongside their own, intermarried. Within generations they were less invaders, more neighbours, different neighbours, but neighbours. The collapse created opportunities for others. Groups that had been marginal, hill peoples, desert tribes, they moved into abandoned lands, empty cities, claimed territories that great kings once ruled. The Israelites were among these groups. The archaeological record shows new settlements in the highlands, small villages, simple pottery, four-room houses, a distinct culture emerging from the chaos, building where Canaanite cities had burned. But they weren't replacing Canaanite culture, they were continuing it, transformed, evolved, but connected. The pottery styles developed from Canaanite forms. The house types modified Canaanite plans. The language was still Canaanite, just called Hebrew now. The Arameans emerged in Syria, the Moabites in Transjordan, the Edomites in the south, each group claiming territory, establishing kingdoms, writing their own stories, but all influenced by the Canaanite foundation, building on ruins, but still building. Iron technology spread during the collapse, not causing it, but accelerated by it. When bronze became impossible, people turned to iron, harder to work, required different techniques, but the ore was everywhere, no need for distant tin. The Philistines may have brought iron technology, or perfected it. For a while they monopolized it. Biblical texts complain that Israelites had to go to Philistine smiths, pay Philistine prices, military disadvantage, economic dependence. But technology spreads, always does. Within a century everyone had iron, tools, weapons, agricultural implements. Iron democratized metal. No more dependence on trade routes. Local production possible. The Iron Age had begun. The religious landscape transformed. The great temples were gone. State religions collapsed with states. But personal religion survived. Household shrines, local cults, traditional practices maintained by families, not priests. This decentralization had consequences. Religious diversity increased. Local tradition strengthened. New movements emerged, including the monotheistic tendencies that would become Judaism, born from chaos, refined in struggle. The old gods didn't disappear, but they changed. Baal became more local, different Baals for different places. El merged with Yahweh. Asherah became controversial, remembered, suppressed, argued about. The pantheon fragmenting, evolving. New stories emerged to explain the catastrophe. Divine punishment for sin. Cosmic battles between order and chaos. Heroes who saved remnants. Villains who caused destruction. Mythology, processing trauma, making sense of senselessness. The Sea Peoples disappeared from history. After destroying the Bronze Age world, they vanished. Absorbed into local populations, sailed away, died out. We don't know. They came from mystery, returned to mystery, leaving only destruction and questions, but also leaving space for new peoples, new ideas, new possibilities. The Bronze Age world was hierarchical, rigid, dominated by palaces and temples. The Iron Age world would be different, more diverse, more democratic, more innovative. The collapse was catastrophe, but also opportunity, creative destruction before economists coined the term. The old world had to end for the new world to begin, and from the ashes of Canaanite cities, new civilizations would rise, different, but carrying Canaanite DNA, the alphabet, the purple, the ships, the stories. The world had ended, but people survived, adapted, rebuilt. The Canaanites were becoming something else, many something elses, Phoenicians, Israelites, Arameans. The transformation was beginning. The fires had been out for maybe 50 years, 2 generations, long enough for grass to grow through palace foundations, for rain to wash ash into soil, for children to be born who'd never seen a real city. That's when the rebuilding started. But it wasn't really rebuilding, it was something new. The people picking through the ruins weren't trying to recreate what was lost. They couldn't. The knowledge was gone, the wealth was gone, the whole system that made Bronze Age cities possible. Gone. So they built differently, smaller, simpler, poorer, but their own. The highlands of Canaan tell the story best. Areas that had been empty during the Bronze Age, too rocky for good farming, too far from trade routes, too poor to attract kings. Now they filled with villages, hundreds of them, small settlements of maybe 50 people, maybe 100. The pottery tells us who these people were, or rather it tells us they were local. The shapes evolved from Canaanite types, the decorations simplified but recognizable. These weren't foreign invaders, they were people who'd always been here. Just not here specifically, in these hills. Some were probably refugees from destroyed cities, survivors who fled to the mountains. Others were pastoral nomads settling down. Groups that had herded sheep between cities now building villages where cities used to be. Others were farmers pushed to marginal land who finally got the chance to claim better territory. The Israelites emerged from this mix, not as conquerors from outside. The archaeology doesn't support that. No destruction layers at the right time, no foreign pottery suddenly appearing, just gradual emergence. Villages becoming more villages, population slowly growing. Their earlier settlements are fascinating. 4-room houses, always the same basic plan, a courtyard with rooms on 3 sides, sometimes 2 stories, animals downstairs, people upstairs, simple, practical, repeated hundreds of times across the highlands, but also distinctive. This house type became an ethnic marker. Israelite areas had 4-room houses, other areas didn't. Architecture as identity. We are the people who build houses like this, live like this, are this. No pork bones in their garbage, that's interesting. Canaanite sites have pig bones. Philistine sites especially, lots of pig bones. But these highland villages? None, or very few. A dietary boundary. We don't eat what they eat. The villages were egalitarian. No palaces, no elite quarters, houses roughly the same size, graves roughly the same wealth, or poverty. Everyone working, everyone struggling, everyone equal, more or less. This was new. Canaanite cities had been hierarchical. Kings, priests, merchants, farmers, slaves, clear distinctions. These villages had none of that. Maybe a respected elder, maybe a successful farmer, but no kings, no professional priests, no standing armies. They organized by kinship, extended families, clans, tribes. The Bible preserves these names: Ephraim, Manasseh, Judah, Benjamin. Whether these were real ancestors or invented ones doesn't matter. What matters is the organizing principle. We're family, literally or metaphorically. The religion was different too. No great temples, couldn't afford them, wouldn't have known how to build them. Instead, high places, simple altars on hilltops, standing stones, sacred trees, religion stripped to essentials, but also personalizing. Without state priests, people developed direct relationships with divinity. The God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob, personal names, family connections, divinity as ancestor, protector, personal relationship. This was revolutionary. In Bronze Age religion, gods related to cities, to kings. Regular people approached gods through intermediaries. Now, in these poor villages, people claim direct divine relationships. God knew them, personally, by name. The text that would become the Bible started forming, not written yet. Literacy had mostly disappeared, but stories, songs, laws, passed orally, modified with each telling, adapted to new situations, living tradition. These stories remembered the Bronze Age, sort of. Abraham wandering between great cities, Moses confronting Pharaoh, Joshua conquering Canaan. Historical memory filtered through centuries of telling. Real events transformed into national mythology, but they also reflected current reality. Stories about younger sons overtaking older ones, because that's what Israel was. The younger son among nations. Stories about shepherds becoming kings, because that's what was happening. David was literally a shepherd boy who became king. Speaking of David, around 1000 BCE, things changed. The villages had grown, coalesced, faced common threats, the Philistines especially, with their iron weapons, their professional armies, their 5 strong cities. Individual villages couldn't resist. Unity became necessity. Saul was the first attempt, a charismatic war leader, tall, strong, brave. The texts remember him fondly, then critically. He united the tribes. Sort of. Fought the Philistines. Sort of. Failed. Died. But proved unity was possible. David succeeded where Saul failed. Partly through military genius, partly through political marriage, partly through sheer personality. He united not just the Israelite tribes but conquered Jerusalem, a Canaanite city that had survived everything, made it his capital. This was brilliant. Jerusalem belonged to no tribe, neutral ground, everyone could accept it. Plus it was defensible, built on a ridge, springs for water, valleys on 3 sides, the perfect capital. David's kingdom was still small, maybe controlling what's now Israel-Palestine, parts of Jordan, nothing like the later legends. But for villages that had started with nothing, it was remarkable. Within a century of collapse, a new kingdom. Built on Canaanite foundations, but distinctly different. Solomon, David's son, went further. Built the temple, finally, a proper temple. But here's the thing, he needed Phoenician craftsmen to build it. Hiram of Tyre sent architects, metalworkers, woodworkers, because Israelites didn't know how. The knowledge was in the coastal cities. This tells us something important. The Phoenician cities were the real Canaanite survivors. Tyre, Sidon, Byblos. They'd maintained continuity, kept the knowledge, the skills, the connections. While the highlands created new identities, the coast preserved old ones, but transformed. The Phoenicians were Canaanites who'd adapted to the new world. No more great empires to manage, no more Egyptian governors. They were independent, really independent, for the first time in centuries. They used that independence brilliantly, rebuilt their fleets, re-established trade networks, but wider, bolder. If the eastern Mediterranean was devastated, sail west. If traditional markets were gone, find new ones. Meanwhile, in Syria, the Arameans were building their kingdoms. Damascus became their greatest city. They spoke a Canaanite language, Aramaic, similar to Hebrew, similar to Phoenician, dialects of the same linguistic family. But Aramaic would spread far beyond Syria, become the international language, the Persian Empire's official language, Jesus' daily language, the Talmud's language, a Canaanite dialect conquering through utility, not armies. The Arameans were traders, like the Phoenicians, but land traders, caravan masters. They rebuilt the inland routes, connected Mesopotamia to the Mediterranean, moved goods the ships couldn't reach, complementary to Phoenician sea trade. East of the Jordan, more kingdoms emerged. Moab, with its famous stone, the Mesha Stele, telling their version of events, how they threw off Israelite domination, proved their god Chemosh was stronger. Alternative history, different perspective. Edom in the south, controlling copper mines. Trade routes to Arabia. The biblical texts remember them as brothers to Israel, Esau's descendants, related but rival. Probably true metaphorically. Similar peoples, different choices. Ammon near modern Ammon. Small but strategic, controlling desert trade routes, worshipping Milcom, building a distinct identity. All these kingdoms shared Canaanite heritage, language, culture, religion. but each claimed uniqueness. The Philistines were different. Foreign origin, Aegean probably, but by 1000 BCE they were localizing, adopting Canaanite language, Canaanite gods. Their pottery still looked Aegean, but their temples looked Canaanite. Cultural fusion happening. They controlled the southern coast, 5 cities, each independent but allied. Like the old Canaanite city-states, they'd learned the local political system, adapted it, made it work for them. The religious landscape was complex. Every kingdom had its national god, Yahweh for Israel, Chemosh for Moab, Milcom for Ammon. But everyone acknowledged other gods existed. They just weren't their gods. Henotheism, scholars call it. One god for us, other gods for them. But Yahweh was different, or becoming different. The Israelite texts make exclusive claims. Not just our God is strongest, but only our God is real. Monotheism emerging, slowly, contested, but emerging. This created conflicts, religious wars, not just political wars with religious justification, but wars about religion itself. Whose God was real? Whose worship was legitimate? New kinds of conflicts, ideological, existential. The old Canaanite culture became controversial, especially the goddess worship. Asherah poles torn down, then rebuilt, then torn down again. The texts preserve the struggle, prophets condemning, people resisting. Traditional religion doesn't die easily, but it was dying, or transforming. The collapse had broken religious continuity. Without temples, priestly knowledge was lost. Without schools, texts weren't copied. Without states, religious authority fractured. Everyone interpreting, innovating, experimenting. New religious movements emerged. Prophets, not court prophets serving kings. Independent prophets, criticizing kings. Speaking for God against power. Revolutionary idea. Divine authority separate from political authority. The alphabet made this possible. Religious texts could spread, be copied, interpreted, without official scribes, without state control. The democratization of writing meant democratization of religion. By 900 BCE, the transformation was complete. The Bronze Age Canaanite world was gone, replaced by Iron Age kingdoms, related but distinct. Speaking evolved Canaanite languages, worshipping evolved Canaanite gods, living in evolved Canaanite ways, but the clearest continuity was on the coast, the Phoenician cities. They kept the purple industry, the cedar trade, the shipping networks, the alphabetic writing, the craft techniques, the mercantile traditions, everything that had made Canaan famous. They just did it better, bigger, bolder, without empires constraining them, without tribute draining them. They were about to explode across the Mediterranean, establish colonies, build an empire of trade, carry Canaanite culture farther than ever before. The ashes had produced new growth, different growth, but rooted in the same soil. The Canaanites hadn't disappeared. They'd transformed, multiplied, become many peoples instead of one, each claiming part of the heritage, each developing it differently. The coastal cities had a choice: shrink with the shattered world around them, accept poverty, fade into obscurity, or do something unprecedented, sail beyond the ruins, find new markets, new opportunities, new worlds. They chose the sea. The Phoenicians weren't really new people. They were Canaanites who survived, adapted, evolved. The same families who'd been making purple dye for centuries, building ships for generations, trading across the Mediterranean since before anyone remembered. But the collapse changed them, freed them really. No more Egyptian governors telling them what to trade, no more Hittite officials demanding tribute, no more imperial bureaucrats skimming profits. For the first time in centuries they were truly independent. And independence made them bold. Ships from Tyre started showing up in strange places, Cyprus they'd always visited. But now they were going farther. Malta, Sicily, Sardinia. Islands beyond islands, following currents, following rumours, following possibilities. The expansion wasn't random. It was systematic, strategic. Every colony placed exactly where it made sense. Natural harbours, fresh water, defensible positions, access to local resources. The Phoenicians were methodical about empire building. But it wasn't an empire like others. No central government, no imperial army, just networks, family networks, business networks, religious networks, connected by ships, held together by profit, managed through relationship. Cadiz, they called Gadir, beyond the Pillars of Hercules, on Spain's Atlantic coast. Nobody had built a permanent settlement that far west. The Phoenicians did. Around 1100 BCE, maybe earlier, a city older than Rome, still there today. Why Cadiz? Silver. The local mines produced incredible amounts. The Tartessians, the local people, had more silver than they knew what to do with. Happy to trade it for manufactured goods, Phoenician pottery, bronze tools, purple cloth, everybody profited. The trade route to Cadiz became legendary. Dangerous but profitable. Storms sank ships regularly. Pirates attacked constantly, but successful voyages paid for 10 failed ones. Risk and reward. Phoenician mathematics. They established way stations, safe harbours every day's sail. Ibiza, Cartagena, Motia in Sicily, Nora in Sardinia. Each started as a trading post, became a town, became a city, the network growing organically. But the greatest colony was Carthage, founded in 814 BCE by Tyre. The story says Princess Dido led refugees from political troubles at home. Maybe true, maybe legend. But Carthage became something unprecedented, a Canaanite city that would challenge Rome itself. The location was perfect. North Africa, natural harbour, fertile hinterland, strategic position. From Carthage you could control Western Mediterranean trade, tax ships passing through, protect your own commerce, threaten enemies. The early Carthaginians stayed connected to Tyre, sent annual tribute, asked permission for major decisions, but distance created independence. By 600 BCE, Carthage was making its own choices, building its own empire, becoming a great power. The Phoenician colonies weren't just trading posts, they were cultural transmission stations, Canaanite culture spreading across the Mediterranean, the alphabet, religious practices, craft techniques, agricultural methods, urban planning, all carried by merchants, settlers, ships. The alphabet spread fastest. Phoenician traders needed to communicate with everyone, Greeks especially. Greek pottery, Greek silver, Greek olive oil, all valuable. But Greeks couldn't read Phoenician script. Solution: teach them. The Greeks learned the Phoenician alphabet around 800 BCE, added vowels to fit their language, but kept the letter names: alpha, beta, gamma, all corrupted Phoenician words: aleph, bet, gimel. The names preserve the origin. From Greek the alphabet spread everywhere: Etruscan, Latin, Germanic runes, Slavic alphabets, all descended from that Phoenician innovation. Every time you read anything alphabetic, you're using a Canaanite invention, refined by Phoenician merchants. Religion travelled too. Melkart, Tyre's city god. Temples to him appeared everywhere Phoenicians settled: Spain, Sicily, Cyprus, North Africa. Always the same rituals, same sacrificial practices, same festivals. Religious unity across vast distances, but also religious mixing. Local gods absorbed into Phoenician pantheon, Phoenician gods adopted by locals. Astarte became Aphrodite, Melkart became Hercules. Divine names changing, divine functions continuing. The craft techniques spread most subtly. Phoenician metalworkers were still the best. Their workshops and colonies produced goods indistinguishable from homeland products. Silver bowls, bronze figurines, ivory carvings, excellence maintained across oceans. Local craftsmen learned by watching, copying, improving. Phoenician techniques adapted to local materials, local tastes. But the quality standards remained. Phoenician brand recognition lasted centuries. The purple industry expanded dramatically. New murex beds discovered, processed locally, shipped as dye or finished cloth. Phoenician purple appeared in Celtic Britain, Germanic tribes, sub-Saharan Africa, colour-spreading civilization, but also creating competition. Other peoples learned to make purple, inferior purple, but purple nonetheless. The monopoly eroded slowly. Phoenicians adapted by going upmarket. Premium products for premium customers. Quality over quantity. The ships themselves evolved. Longer voyages needed bigger ships, better designs. The Phoenicians pioneered deep-sea navigation, improved hull shapes, advanced rigging systems. Their ships became legendary, copied everywhere, improved nowhere. Navigation techniques advanced too, star maps for open ocean sailing, current charts for difficult passages, wind patterns recorded over generations, harbour pilots who knew every rock, every reef, every safe approach, knowledge worth fortunes. The hazards were real, ships sank, crews drowned, cargoes lost. But also ships returned, loaded with wealth, stories, new ideas. The profits funded more ships, bigger expeditions, riskier voyages, success breeding expansion. Pirates were constant threats, not just individual raiders, organized fleets, some backed by rival cities, some purely mercenary. Phoenician ships carried guards, travelled in convoys, built fortified harbours, maritime security as business necessity. Competition came from unexpected sources. The Greeks were learning, building their own merchant fleets, establishing their own colonies, often in direct competition with Phoenician settlements, commercial rivalry, sometimes military conflict, but also cooperation. Greeks and Phoenicians often traded with each other, intermarried, shared technologies, competition and collaboration coexisting, business pragmatism overriding ethnic differences, profit as universal language. The colonies developed their own identities. Carthaginian culture wasn't exactly Tyrian. Spanish Phoenicians weren't exactly Sidonian. Distance and local adaptation created variations, but core elements remained. Language, religion, values, business practices. By 600 BCE, the Phoenician network spanned the Mediterranean. From Lebanon to Spain, Cyprus to Morocco, hundreds of settlements, thousands of ships, millions of people connected by trade, culture, heritage, the most successful expansion in ancient history. But it was fragile, dependent on ships, on routes, on relationships. When sea lanes closed, the network suffered. When major cities fell, whole regions felt it. Success built on water, vulnerable to storms. The Assyrians understood this, started conquering Phoenician cities in the 8th century. Tyre resisted longest. 13-year siege, finally fell in 574 BCE to Babylon. The homeland cities conquered, occupied, diminished. But the colonies survived, Carthage especially. It became the new centre, the Phoenician phoenix risen from Tyrian ashes, carrying forward the culture, the traditions, the dreams, independence preserved through distance. Carthaginian ships continued exploring, down the African coast, maybe around the whole continent, up the European Atlantic, possibly reaching Britain, Ireland. The voyages of Hanno and Hamilco became legendary, real expeditions, exaggerated stories, truth enhanced by telling. The agricultural techniques spread too. Phoenicians were excellent farmers, had to be, supporting cities from limited land, terracing, irrigation, crop rotation, fertilization. Mediterranean agriculture still uses their methods. Urban planning showed Phoenician influence everywhere. Grid street systems, central markets, separate quarters for different activities, harbours integrated with cities, infrastructure as imperial legacy, cities built like Phoenician cities. The legal traditions lasted longer than the cities. Commercial law, maritime contracts, insurance concepts, dispute resolution, business practices developed over centuries, refined through experience, adopted by everyone who traded. Language preserved memory. Phoenician words entered every Mediterranean language, marine terms, trade vocabulary, names for exotic goods, linguistic archaeology, tracing commercial connections, words as evidence of influence. But the greatest legacy was cultural mixing. Phoenicians didn't just spread their culture, they absorbed others, learned from everyone, adapted constantly, created hybrid civilizations, East meeting West, innovation through integration. The artistic legacy is stunning. Phoenician workshops produced goods for international markets, incorporating Egyptian motifs, Mesopotamian techniques, Greek styles, local preferences, globalization before the word existed. Religious syncretism reached extraordinary levels. Phoenician colonies had temples to dozens of gods, local deities honored alongside traditional ones. Religious tolerance as business necessity. Offended gods meant lost customers. But traditional Canaanite values persisted. Extended family loyalty, commercial honesty, religious observance, practical innovation. The core cultural DNA survived, thrived, spread across 3 continents. Women participated fully in Phoenician commerce, rare for the ancient world, ran businesses, owned ships, made religious decisions, gender equality as competitive advantage, doubling available talent, intelligence, energy. The children of Phoenician colonies were truly international, speaking multiple languages, understanding different cultures, comfortable everywhere, at home nowhere, the first cosmopolitan generation, citizens of the world before there was a world. By 500 BCE, you could travel from Lebanon to Spain, stay in Phoenician cities, eat familiar food, worship familiar gods, speak the same language, conduct business with known rules, cultural unity across vast distances, achieved through commerce, not conquest. But the world was changing again. New powers rising, Rome expanding, aggressive, intolerant of rivals. The Phoenician network would face its greatest test. Survival would require everything they'd learned, everything they'd become. The coastal Canaanites had chosen wisely. When their world collapsed, they didn't collapse with it. They rebuilt, expanded, innovated, carried their heritage farther than armies ever could, made Canaanite culture immortal through trade. The phoenix had risen, spread wings of purple and cedar, soared beyond imagining. But flight always ends in landing, and Rome was waiting. Something strange was happening in the hills of Judah, in small villages, in family shrines, in the minds of people who'd never been to a great temple. The old gods weren't disappearing, they were merging, changing, becoming something new. The process took centuries. Nobody woke up one morning and decided to invent monotheism. It grew slowly, quietly, like everything important, through stories told around fires, prayers whispered in darkness, questions asked by children who wanted simple answers. Why so many gods? Why not just one? El had always been the father god, the wise one, the creator. But in Canaanite tradition he shared power, had a wife, children, a whole divine family with their own roles, their own territories, their own personalities. But what if El wasn't sharing power? What if those other gods were just aspects, servants, angels? The Hebrew word Elohim is plural, but it often takes singular verbs in biblical texts. Grammatical confusion or theological evolution. God's becoming God. The name itself tells the story. El, the generic Canaanite word for God, became a specific name for Israel's God, but also remained generic. El Shaddai, El Elyon, El Olam, all old Canaanite titles, applied to Israel's single deity. Yahweh absorbed Baal's functions, storm god attributes, rainbringer, cloud rider. The biblical texts use Baal's exact titles: rider on the clouds, he who thunders, master of the storm, same job description, different employee. Even the imagery is identical. Yahweh defeats the sea monster Leviathan, just like Baal defeated Yam. Yahweh battles chaos, brings order, controls fertility. The stories are parallel, sometimes word for word, Canaanite literature recycled for monotheistic purposes. But something subtle was happening. The divine council wasn't disappearing, it was being demoted. El's family became Yahweh's servants, the sons of God mentioned in biblical texts. Angels, still divine, but subordinate, not competitors, employees. This solved problems. How do you explain multiple divine beings in a monotheistic system? Make them servants of the one God, messengers, agents, the bureaucracy of heaven, unity through hierarchy rather than elimination. The archaeological evidence shows the transition. Early Israelite sites have multiple divine figurines. Yahweh, but also Asherah, Baal, local gods. Household religion stayed traditional, while official religion evolved. Change from the top down, resistance from the bottom up. Biblical texts preserve the struggle. Prophets condemning goddess worship, kings tearing down Asherah poles, then people rebuilding them. Traditional religion doesn't die easily, especially when it meets real needs: fertility, protection, healing. But gradually Asherah became controversial, then illegal, then forgotten, mostly. Archaeological evidence shows her worship continued in rural areas for centuries, but officially she was gone, the divine feminine absorbed into the masculine, or suppressed. The temple in Jerusalem became crucial, not because it was bigger than Canaanite temples, it wasn't, but because it claimed exclusivity, not just the place to worship Yahweh in Jerusalem, the only legitimate place to worship Yahweh anywhere. This was revolutionary. Canaanite gods had many temples, local shrines, regional variations, but Yahweh's cult was being centralized, standardized, controlled. One temple, one priesthood, one version of proper worship. The architecture told the story. Solomon's temple used Phoenician craftsmen, followed Canaanite temple plans, but with modifications. No divine statues in the inner shrine, no representations of God, the invisible deity, present but not depicted. The rituals showed continuity and change. Animal sacrifice continued. Grain offerings, incense, music, dance, all recognizably Canaanite, but reinterpreted. No longer feeding gods who needed food, but showing devotion to God who needed nothing. The Psalms preserve Canaanite poetry, sometimes directly. Psalm 29 could be a Baal hymn with names changed. The voice of Yahweh over the waters, the God of glory thunders, pure Canaanite storm god language, applied to Israel's universal deity. But also new themes: social justice, care for the poor, widow, orphan, stranger. These weren't typical ancient divine concerns. Gods usually protected their own people. Yahweh was developing broader interests, universal ethics. The prophetic tradition grew from Canaanite ecstatic religion. Prophets who received divine messages, spoke in trances, behaved strangely. But Israelite prophecy added something new: social criticism, speaking truth to power, God's voice against injustice. This was dangerous. Kings didn't like being criticized, especially by people claiming divine authority. Some prophets were killed, others imprisoned. But the tradition survived because the message resonated. God cared about justice, not just ritual. The covenant concept came from Canaanite political treaties, vassal kings swearing loyalty to great kings, but applied religiously. Israel as Yahweh's vassal nation, bound by law, protected by divine power, responsible for obedience, but also transformed. Ancient treaties protected the strong. This covenant protected the weak, required justice, demanded compassion. The political form filled with ethical content, law as love in action. Exile deepened the process. When Jerusalem fell, the temple burned, the people scattered, traditional religion collapsed. No temple meant no sacrifices, no priesthood meant no mediation. People faced God directly, personally. This crisis accelerated theological development. If Yahweh let his temple be destroyed, was he weak, defeated, or was destruction divine judgment, justice in action? The prophets chose the second option. God was too holy to tolerate injustice, even in his chosen people. Return from exile brought new understanding, rebuilt temple, restored worship, but also new emphasis. Written law, scribal interpretation, the oral traditions written down, standardized, made permanent, religion becoming textual. The Persian period was crucial. Persian tolerance allowed religious diversity, but also encouraged standardization. Each people should have clear laws, defined practices, organized priesthood, monotheism as administrative convenience. Greek influence brought philosophical concepts, abstract thinking about divinity, universal principles, natural law. Jewish thinkers absorbed these ideas, applied them to Yahweh, the personal God of Abraham becoming universal creator of everything. But the emotional connection remained Canaanite. God as father, shepherd, protector, lover, personal relationship transcending philosophical abstraction, heart knowledge alongside head knowledge, both necessary, neither sufficient alone. The wisdom literature shows the blend, practical advice, moral instruction, but grounded in relationship with God, fear of Yahweh as beginning of wisdom, knowledge as worship, intelligence as devotion. Women's roles shifted dramatically. Canaanite religion had prominent goddesses, female priests, sacred prostitution, fertility cults. Monotheism eliminated most of this. Centralized male priesthood, patriarchal worship, divine feminine marginalized, but preserved in metaphor. God as mother, divine wisdom personified as woman, the Shekinah presence as feminine, suppression creating sublimation, the goddess returning as literary device. Festivals continued but transformed. Canaanite agricultural celebrations became historical commemorations. Harvest festivals remembered Exodus from Egypt. New Year became Day of Judgment. Seasonal rhythms interpreted as divine history. The legal traditions blended innovation with continuity. Some laws identical to Canaanite codes, others completely new. Social justice provisions, Sabbath rest, Jubilee year, economic regulations protecting the poor. But enforcement remained traditional. Community pressure, shame, ostracism, ancient social controls applied to new ethical standards. The forms familiar, the content revolutionary. By 400 BCE, the transformation was largely complete. Multiple gods had become one god. Local deities had become universal creator. Ethnic protector had become cosmic judge. Canaanite religion had become Jewish monotheism. But the roots remained visible, to those who knew where to look. Divine council language, storm god imagery, temple architecture, ritual practices, covenant concepts, all evolved from Canaanite origins, transformed but traceable. Christianity would inherit this synthesis, Jesus as Jewish teacher, Paul as Pharisee, but also Greek philosophical concepts, Roman legal structures, mystery religion practices, another layer of transformation, building on the foundation. Islam would draw from the same sources, Abraham's God, Moses' law, Jesus' teachings, but also Arabian traditions, Zoroastrian concepts, Jewish mysticism, the third great monotheism, related but distinct. The influence spread beyond religion. Ethical monotheism became foundational to Western civilization. human dignity, social justice, universal law, moral progress, ideas that seemed obvious now, revolutionary then. But none of it would have happened without the Canaanite foundation. El's fatherhood, Baal's power, Asherah's nurture, the divine council's order, local traditions providing vocabulary for universal truths. The gods hadn't died. They'd been transformed, their best qualities preserved, their limitations transcended, multiplicity organized into unity, locality expanded into universality, the Canaanite pantheon becoming the one god of billions. It was evolution, not revolution. Gradual change, careful adaptation, the old growing into the new, caterpillar becoming butterfly, same essence, transformed expression, the Canaanite gift to human understanding of the divine. The end came slowly, not with dramatic battles or sudden conquests, more like autumn, leaves changing colour, falling one by one, until the branches were bare and winter had arrived. Nobody quite noticed when. The Assyrians started it. Around 740 BCE, they'd been expanding westward for decades, city by city, province by province. The old diplomatic game stopped working. You couldn't play empires against each other when only one empire remained. Tiglath-Pileser III was systematic, methodical. He didn't just conquer cities, he relocated populations, mixed peoples, broke old loyalties, created new dependencies. The 10 northern tribes of Israel, deported, scattered, lost to history. But here's the interesting thing. The Assyrians adopted what they conquered. Canaanite craftsmen became royal artisans. Phoenician ships joined the imperial navy. The alphabet spread through Assyrian administration, conquerors becoming conquered by superior culture. Damascus fell in 732, Israel in 722, Canaanite kingdoms collapsing like dominoes, but survivors adapted, learned Aramaic, served new masters, kept their skills, their knowledge, their traditions. Occupation wasn't extinction. Judah survived longer, paid tribute, played politics. Hezekiah tried rebellion. Bad idea. Sennacherib's army devastated the countryside, besieged Jerusalem. Only divine intervention saved the city, or plague, or Egyptian diplomacy. The accounts differ, but survival came at a price. Heavy taxation, foreign oversight, religious compromise, Assyrian gods in the temple, Assyrian officials in the palace, independence becoming memory, autonomy becoming hope. The northern cities suffered worse. Sidon destroyed multiple times, Tyre besieged repeatedly, the great Phoenician ports reduced to tribute-paying vassals. Their fleets still sailed, their merchants still traded, but profits flowed to Assyrian treasuries. Yet culture proved stronger than politics. Phoenician colonies remained free, Carthage especially, growing in power while the homeland weakened. The Phoenician phoenix had many nests. Destroying one didn't kill the species. Babylon replaced Assyria around 605 BCE. Same system, different rulers, more destruction, more deportations. Jerusalem finally fell in 586. The temple burned, the elite exiled, the Davidic kingdom ended. Another chapter closed. But exile preserved what conquest destroyed. Judean scribes in Babylon collected traditions, wrote them down, standardized them, the oral culture becoming textual, portable, permanent, defeat creating documentation. The Babylonian exile lasted 50 years, 2 generations, long enough for children to grow up speaking Aramaic, thinking Mesopotamian thoughts, but remembering Jerusalem, dreaming of return, memory as resistance. Persian conquest changed everything. Cyrus the Great had different ideas about empire. Local customs should be preserved, not destroyed. People should return to their lands, rebuild their temples, worship their gods. Diversity as imperial policy. The return to Jerusalem was gradual, partial. Many Jews stayed in Babylon, preferred prosperity to piety. But enough returned to rebuild. The Second Temple, smaller than Solomon's, poorer, but functioning, symbolic, hopeful. Persian rule lasted 2 centuries. Benign occupation, heavy taxation but light cultural control. Judaism developed under Persian influence. Zoroastrian concepts, angelic hierarchies, cosmic dualism, good and evil, resurrection of the dead. The Phoenician cities recovered somewhat. Persian naval power needed their ships, their expertise, their harbours. Tyre and Sidon regained importance, not independence, but relevance, value, survival through usefulness. Trade networks rebuilt themselves, not as extensive as before, not as profitable, but functional. Phoenician merchants still carried goods across the Mediterranean, still connected cultures, still spread ideas, persistence through adaptation. Alexander arrived in 332 BCE, bringing Greek culture, Greek ideas, Greek language, the ancient world's third great cultural layer, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, now Greek, all mixing in former Canaanite lands. Tyre resisted Alexander. 7-month siege, the city fell, was destroyed, rebuilt, but differently. Greek-style architecture, Greek administration, Greek customs, Hellenization as cultural conquest, more thorough than military occupation. Yet underneath, older traditions persisted. People still spoke Aramaic at home, still followed ancestral customs, still worshipped traditional gods. Cultural layering, not replacement. Greek on top, Canaanite underneath. Both real, both important. The Ptolemies ruled from Egypt, the Seleucids from Syria. Former Canaanite lands divided between Greek dynasties. Local rulers became Greek courtiers. Local gods gained Greek names. Local cities received Greek constitutions. But fusion created innovation. Greek philosophy met Jewish theology. Platonic concepts interpreted biblical texts. Rational arguments supported revealed truth. The Septuagint translation put Hebrew scriptures into Greek, made Jewish ideas accessible to Gentile minds. Christianity emerged from this mixture, Jesus teaching in Aramaic, Paul writing in Greek, communities meeting in homes with Canaanite foundations, the new religion growing in soil enriched by 3 millennia of cultural mixing. Early Christian churches often stood on ancient Canaanite sacred sites, temple mounds, holy springs, sacred groves. The locations remained holy, only the rituals changed. Continuity through transformation, ancient pattern repeating. Roman conquest completed the political process. 63 BCE for the inland areas, later for coastal cities. Romans were practical, efficient. They kept what worked, changed what didn't, made everything profitable. Phoenician maritime expertise impressed Romans. They copied ship designs, navigation techniques, harbour construction, commercial practices, the conquered teaching the conquerors, knowledge transcending politics. Roman authors praised Phoenician achievements. Virgil celebrated Dido's Carthage. Pliny described Phoenician inventions. Tacitus acknowledged their contributions. Even while destroying their independence, Romans honoured their legacy. The Jewish revolts brought devastation. 66-73 CE. 132-136 CE. Jerusalem destroyed, temple levelled, population scattered. The Second Great Exile. Diaspora becoming permanent condition, but also preservation strategy, survival through dispersion. By 200 CE, political Canaanite identity was gone. No independent kingdoms, no autonomous cities, no ethnic continuity with ancient peoples. The names survived, the places remained. But the political entities had vanished, yet cultural influence accelerated. Christianity spread Canaanite-influenced ideas across the Roman Empire. Monotheism, ethical law, social justice, personal relationship with divinity, ancient Canaanite concepts reaching unprecedented audiences. The alphabet conquered through utility. Latin letters, based on Greek forms, derived from Phoenician innovations, rooted in Canaanite creativity. Every Roman inscription used their system. Every Christian manuscript employed their invention. Commercial law preserved Phoenician wisdom. Contract forms, insurance concepts, banking practices, trade regulations, business ethics, the practical knowledge of millennia, embedded in Roman jurisprudence, surviving political collapse. Islamic conquest found ancient traditions still alive. Christian communities, Jewish settlements, Samaritan survivors, each preserving fragments of the past. Arabic historians recorded their stories, preserved their memories, honored their contributions. Medieval geographers still used ancient names: Phoenicia, Canaan, Palestine, Syria. The Roman provincial system preserved traditional boundaries, traditional identities, political death, but geographical immortality. Crusader states briefly revived ancient patterns, coastal cities, maritime trade, cultural mixing, European, Byzantine, and Arab influences blending, history rhyming with itself, different actors, similar themes, Mamluk rule, Ottoman administration, French mandate, independence movements, each era adding layers. But underneath, ancient patterns persisted: trade routes, urban locations, cultural boundaries, the deep structure enduring surface changes. Modern Lebanon claims Phoenician heritage. Genetic studies show population continuity. DNA analysis traces ancestry. The people never disappeared, just changed languages, religions, rulers, political identities evolving while genetic heritage persisted. Archaeological nationalism uses ancient glory for modern purposes. Lebanese politicians invoke Phoenician achievements. Israeli scholars claim Canaanite roots. Palestinian activists emphasize indigenous continuity, the past as political resource, but also genuine connection. Modern Lebanese still build boats like ancient Phoenicians, still cook foods with Canaanite origins, still tell stories with ancient roots. Cultural DNA expressing itself, unconsciously, naturally, authentically. The wine industry, cedar preservation efforts, archaeological tourism, purple dye reconstruction, modern attempts to revive ancient traditions, sometimes commercial, sometimes scholarly, sometimes nostalgic, always meaningful. Place names preserve memory: Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, Hebron, Jericho. Cities continuously inhabited for millennia. Archaeological layers like geological strata, each generation building on predecessors, literal palimpsest of human occupation. Language archaeology reveals deeper continuities, Arabic retaining Canaanite words, Hebrew preserving ancient vocabulary, Aramaic surviving in villages, linguistic fossils of vanished worlds, words as time capsules. Religious practices show remarkable persistence. Pilgrimage sites, sacred springs, holy trees, traditional festivals, often Islamized or Christianized, but recognizably ancient. Devotional geography unchanged despite theological transformation. The fade was complete, politically, but culturally, the influence had spread too far, taken too many forms, entered too many bloodstreams. Canaanite civilization had died as a political entity, but lived on as cultural DNA, invisible but essential, ancient but eternal. By 1900 CE, archaeologists were digging, discovering, reconstructing, the ancient world emerging from tells and tablets, forgotten civilizations speaking again, through pottery shards, through bronze fragments, through alphabetic inscriptions. The Canaanites had their voice back, not as living people, but as historical influence, archaeological evidence replacing biblical polemics, scholarly research balancing religious traditions, the past becoming more complex, more interesting, more human. They hadn't vanished. They'd transformed, multiplied, become the foundation for everything that followed. Their political death had enabled cultural immortality. The long fade was really metamorphosis. Caterpillar becoming butterfly, ancient becoming eternal. Close your eyes for a moment. Think about the letters forming these words. Each one descended from pictures carved by Canaanite miners. The A from an ox head, the B from a house, the M from water. Ancient symbols simplified, refined, passed down through 3,000 years. Every time you write your name, you're using their gift. The Canaanites never built pyramids, never conquered vast empires, never left monuments that tourist buses visit today. But they gave humanity something more lasting, more useful, more revolutionary than stone and gold. They gave us the tools to think, to communicate, to remember. That alphabet you learned in childhood? Canaanite innovation. The wine at dinner? They perfected viticulture. The purple in royal robes? Their monopoly for 1,000 years. The very idea of cities as melting pots. They invented cosmopolitan living. But more than that, they showed us how different peoples could live together, trade together, create together. Their cities welcomed everyone, Egyptian refugees, Mesopotamian merchants, Aegean craftsmen, all finding homes, all contributing, all belonging. In our modern world of migrations and mixing, they were the first to make it work. Not perfectly, but successfully, for centuries, maybe millennia. Diversity as strength, difference as advantage, cooperation across cultures. The harbours they built still shelter ships, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, ports that have welcomed vessels for 3,000 years, Roman galleys, Crusader ships, Ottoman merchants, modern cargo containers. The locations they chose remain optimal, their engineering still functional. Walk through any Mediterranean town, the narrow streets, the stone buildings, the central markets. The architectural DNA is often theirs. Cities built like Canaanite cities, organised around trade, around welcome, around possibility. The purple they perfected disappeared as an industry, but the principle remains, taking something common, the humble murex snail, and creating something precious, something valuable, something desired across the world. Innovation through transformation. Modern industries do the same thing. Silicon becomes computers, sand becomes glass, oil becomes plastic. The Canaanite spirit, finding value in the overlooked, creating wealth from the mundane, seeing potential where others see nothing. Their ships carried more than goods. They carried ideas, stories, technologies, religions, the original global network, connecting cultures, spreading knowledge, making the ancient world smaller, more connected, more human. Today's internet does something similar. Information flowing freely, cultures mixing digitally, knowledge spreading instantly, the same impulse, the same result, connection, understanding, shared humanity. The gods they worshipped evolved into the faiths billions follow today. El became the god of monotheism. Their stories influenced every major religion. Their temples provided architectural models. Their rituals shaped worship practices. But beyond specific beliefs, they contributed something deeper. The idea that divine and human could relate personally. That gods cared about justice. That religious experience could be individual, not just institutional. Personal faith, direct relationship, universal access to the sacred. Their legal traditions influence us still. Commercial contracts, international agreements, dispute resolution, trade law, maritime insurance. They needed these things first, developed them pragmatically, refined them through experience, left them for us to use. Every time businesses make deals across borders, every time ships carry cargo safely, every time contracts protect both parties, we're using systems they pioneered, problems they solved, wisdom they earned through centuries of trial and error. The foods on our tables trace back to them, wine grapes they cultivated, olive trees they planted, wheat varieties they selected, cooking techniques they perfected, the Mediterranean diet, the foundation of healthy eating, their gift to human nutrition. Even the music we hear carries echoes, scales they developed, instruments they perfected, rhythms they created for religious festivals. Musical DNA passed down through generations, evolving, adapting, but recognizably connected. Their greatest achievement might be the most invisible. They proved that small peoples could have large impacts, that you don't need vast armies to change the world, just good ideas, useful innovations, smart adaptations, intelligence over force. They were never the biggest population, never the strongest military, never the richest kingdom. But they influenced everyone, outlasted empires, spread farther than armies, through excellence, through usefulness, through persistence. In our age of small nations and global influence, they're the perfect model. Singapore, Switzerland, Denmark, small countries with outsized impact, the Canaanite pattern. Size doesn't determine significance. Quality matters more than quantity. They also show that survival doesn't require fighting everyone. Sometimes it's better to trade with enemies, to adapt to occupiers, to find value in cooperation, pragmatism over ideology, flexibility over rigidity, survival through usefulness. Modern multiculturalism owes them a debt. They proved different peoples could share cities, intermarry, create hybrid cultures, preserve traditions while adapting practices, unity without uniformity, diversity within community. Their refugees became founders, Dido establishing Carthage, Israelites creating kingdoms, Aramaeans building Damascus, displacement as opportunity, exile as expansion, loss as liberation. The diaspora pattern that would shape Jewish history and human history. Today's global cities look like ancient Canaanite ports. New York, London, Hong Kong, Singapore, places where the world comes together, where languages mix, where cultures blend, where innovation happens through interaction. The environmental lessons are sobering. They overexploited their forests, overharvested their seas, created the first ecological disasters, but also the first conservation efforts, learning sustainability through necessity, balancing extraction with renewal. Modern environmental challenges echo theirs: global trade versus local resources, economic growth versus ecological health, short-term profits versus long-term survival. They faced these dilemmas first, found some solutions, made some mistakes, left us lessons. The archaeological sites tell stories still being discovered. Every excavation reveals new details, new connections, new understandings. The past isn't fixed, it's constantly being rewritten as we learn more, understand better, see clearer. Genetic studies trace their descendants: Lebanese, Palestinians, Israelis, Syrians, all carrying Canaanite DNA. The people never disappeared, just changed names, changed languages, changed religions, but remained, adapted, survived. Their languages live on too: Hebrew, Arabic, Aramaic. All children of ancient Canaanite. Different dialects of the same family, sisters separated by history, but sharing vocabulary, grammar, deep structure, linguistic archaeology revealing connections. Place names preserve memory. Rivers, mountains, cities, villages, names that predate empires, survive conquests, outlast governments, geographic archaeology, topological time capsules, the landscape remembering what books forget. In Lebanon's mountains, old men still make wine like their ancestors. In Cyprus's workshops, craftsmen still work metal with ancient techniques. In Morocco's markets, merchants still bargain with Phoenician passion. Tradition as living memory. The tides that wash Mediterranean shores touched Canaanite ships. The winds that fill modern sails filled theirs. The stars they navigated by still guide travellers. The natural world connects us. Time as illusion. Distance as dream. As you drift towards sleep tonight, remember you're not alone. Millions of people across history have looked at these same stars, heard these same waves, felt these same hopes, dreamed these same dreams, human connection across millennia. The Canaanites found something eternal on their narrow shore between sea and desert. Not gold that tarnishes, not bronze that corrodes, but ideas that endure, innovations that spread, wisdom that lasts. They learned that home isn't just a place, it's connections, relationships, shared values. Their home became the world, their family became humanity, their legacy became ours. Every alphabetic letter carries their memory. Every purple sunset echoes their achievement. Every ship that crosses seas follows routes they pioneered. Every city that welcomes strangers honors their example. They believed in tomorrow, planted trees they wouldn't see mature, built ships for voyages they wouldn't complete, taught children knowledge they wouldn't use, investment in the future, faith in continuity, trust in human potential. Tonight, as ancient stars wheel overhead, as timeless waves whisper against eternal shores, their voices join the chorus of memory, speaking across centuries, reminding us who we are, where we came from, what we might become. Sleep now, rest in the knowledge that you're part of something larger, older, more beautiful than any single life, connected to everyone who ever wondered, who ever explored, who ever hoped. The Canaanites' greatest discovery wasn't purple or bronze or the alphabet. It was that human creativity has no limits, that small beginnings can have infinite endings, that every innovation builds on what came before and makes possible what comes next. Their eternal shore is consciousness itself, the endless beach where each generation walks, leaving footprints in the sand for the next wave to wash away and the next travellers to replace. Dream well, you're walking with them now,